Hello, everybody. My name is Tony Morrow, and welcome to Star Trek Lost Stars. Now, if I look at the clock right now, it's about 10 to 9 on the Pacific time, which means I'm a good 6 and change hours late on my 2:30 broadcast today. So my apologies to everybody who was looking forward to our 2:30 broadcast. Excuse me as I clear my throat. But yeah, we're running a little late today. Cheers to you on a wonderful Saturday evening. Looking forward to this evening to be able to do a couple things. One, to be able to bring you up to date on the current progress of turns. And two, we're going to talk about combat. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about what this is going to be. It's a tactical session. Wow, that whiskey is just burning down my throat. Welcome, everybody. It's fantastic to see you today here on Saturday night. This is going to be a bit of a two-parter. One, we're going to just quickly give you a quick recap on where we're at in the turn progression on the campaign. And then two, we're going to talk about combat. But in case you are new and you have no idea what I'm talking about, welcome to Star Trek Lost Stars. This is a 4X turn-based strategy game called Federation and Empire that I and a bunch of our friends here on the channel are playing together to be able to expand and explore our borders through unknown space, to be able to exploit our resources and exterminate our enemies as we encounter them. We are playing this in the Star Trek universe, meaning that, or Starfleet universe rather, meaning that it's basically Star Trek TOS, the original series, that or the animated series. If you're a fan of Kirk and Spock and all things sort of USS Enterprise 1701, that's where we're living and breathing this game. It's very much in the spirit of the original series, in the spirit of Axanar, as opposed to some other series that you may have come across in your time. That said, of course, if you're a Star Trek fan of any type and any shape, or sci-fi fan of any shape, feel free to join us here on Star Trek Lost Stars, because really this is just basically a sci-fi war game that we're doing a little bit of role-playing with and doing it in a turn-based way. So thank you for joining us today. If you are interested in this content, then please feel free to follow us here on Twitch, subscribe on YouTube, give us the thumbs up to let us know that you're liking what we're doing, and we will carry on. So we are talking about today about the turn. And so let me bring you up to speed on turn 84 and turn 85. So let me do that now. Welcome to the map. As you can see here on the map, this is turn 84. And as always, we're starting our sort of look over here on Big Red. Big Red is the Tholian Empire. Tholian Empire being sort of those wedge-shaped shifts you might have seen in the series Enterprise or the Tholian Web episode in the original series, or any number of Star Trek episodes that feature the Tholians, basically a crystalline kind of a race that has highly advanced ships and operates in a very small sector of space in the Starfleet universe. In this game, however, they are still the same ships for all intents and purposes. However, they are not the crystalline forms that you are familiar with. Rather, they are an elephantine form called the Fithip. That comes from a science fiction series of novels that I have promised you an episode on to get into depth with those, and that is still to come. But as far as the game is concerned, essentially this is the Tholian faction. From a role-playing perspective, they are not the crystalline forms. They are basically elephantine. They look like elephants with trunks that have multiple sort of appendages. As opposed to one giant trunk, it is 2 or 3 limbed trunk that has that is multidextrous and allows them to be able to interact and do things with tools and consoles and various other things. However, it is still done sort of in the sort of frontier mindset or personality trait, and the Tholians are very much sort of archaeologically based, as is the current sort of pattern of the role play. They are played basically as an archaeological driven archaeologically driven? Sure, archaeologically driven society based and rooted in history and valuing sort of the data of historical information. Long story short, with the sort of combat capabilities of Tholian ships, they are relatively, at this point, at the Y era, they are relatively weak in their offensive capabilities, but they are very strong in their defensive capabilities. They are able to join together in what you might have heard as the Tholian web and the Tholian wheel. These are basically sort of tactical strategies that they employ that are deployed in the strategic game that allow them to be able to combine various units to a more defensively compatible or defensively capable combat form. So basically, their defensive factor is high, their offensive factor is low, and that's the way it is. So attack them at your peril, and at this point in the game, don't necessarily feel overly threatened by their ability to attack you, because they're not that offensively powerful. That will change. As we go through here, you will see the Peruvians. The Peruvians, as a recap, quick recap, they are the Peruvian Horde. Peruvian Horde is being run in very much the sort of Mongolian Empire-esque way. They are a series of nomads that roam and range across the galaxy, and they are looking to raid and pillage, much like Vikings or, like I say, Mongols, raid and pillage and build an empire in this way, and to be able to sort of harass and potentially intimidate their neighbors. At this point in the game, however, our interactions with the Peruvians have been very very good. They have not sort of indicated any hostile intent towards us, but again, they are the Peruvian Horde, and that's sort of the mentality around the Peruvian mentality. Hey, I'm just noticing the chat now, and just so you know, I'm monitoring the chat on my phone. So Athos, by the way, is the one who is who is playing the Peruvians. He says, "Evening, Tony. They were one of the crystalline Tholian subject species. The Tholians were wiped out." Yeah. So in the context of this game, and I don't believe it's in the actual sci-fi literature, but regardless, in the context of this game, the elephantine species that are the Tholians are effectively a subject race, sort of like a vassal race of the Tholians. While the Tholians were wiped out, the fifth ep, these elephantine species still existed or continue to exist, and they kind of picked up and were able to recover the technology of the Tholians that was left on their various planets and kind of develop it from there. So that's the way that goes. As we scroll down even further, you will notice the Batman faction. I call them the Batman faction because A, they're black and yellow, and if we scroll or zoom in, you will see that their ships look like bats. Like, it looks like the Batman symbol. I mean, really. That being said, they are the Borak when it comes to the the specifics of the sort of the faction in Federation Empire, but they are being played as the Starcom faction of BattleTech. Now, I'll let you know that I love BattleTech, but I don't have a great depth of knowledge on the lore of BattleTech. So when it comes to Starcom, I can't tell you a lot of in-depth background as to what's going on there. However, I will say that I have talked to the GM who is running that particular faction, and I've asked him for a little bit of clarification on kind of what they're doing based on sort of the roleplay emails that I've seen. He tells me they're straight up Starcom. So, okay, I got to do a little bit of research on Starcom, but effectively they are at this point, an offensively focused species. They are not quite xenophobic, but sort of hostile to outside intent. And they're a little bit more aggressive than other species. But we'll get to that in a moment. And our last sort of folks on the docket, as I zoom out here, are the Federation. Now, you know the Federation as the faction of Captain Kirk, Jean-Luc Picard, and Benjamin Sisko, and as well, Captain Janeway. Or I suppose Admiral Janeway, depending on what the most recent, I think it was in Nemesis, she was an Admiral, or something along those lines. Cheers, by the way. Ooh. Yeah, that's strong. So this is the Federation faction. And I'm going to show you a couple things about the Feds because they're a particular focus of this series of turns. One of the things about the Feds, and I know for myself, I think about this sort of a lot. When you think of the Federation, you think the earliest that you can possibly think of them. You think of them in the Kirk sort of mentality, and the Kirk universe in which they exist is like the Federation just runs around with a whole bunch of Constitution class ships because in the original series that was the only model they had for the Feds. So they run around with all these Constitution class ships and, you know, are the NATO/US of the intergalactic military factions. In this game, the ships in the Federation are a little different. In the earlier eras of the Federation, they don't have the classic saucer, you know, like the classic Constitution look of a ship. Like even if when you go to look at Enterprise, if you were to consider Enterprise as part of this continuity, which it is not, but nonetheless, in Enterprise, they have that sort of saucer style aesthetic, and they have the warp engine or the warp modules in the back. And so that to a certain degree, that's not how the early Federation ships are designed. In fact, let me see here if I can pull up a Fed Third Fleet. I think Third Fleet's got one of these guys. Yeah, okay. So you can see this shape here. It might be a little hard for you to see on the screen here, but the OACM. So the OCA. So the OCA is an old CA. CA being a cruiser. That is a designation for cruiser. And the OCA is basically this is just the hull design and shape. And so what this is effectively is a hull shape that is reminiscent of the light cruiser. The light cruiser, which you can see here, the CLM, there's three of them. There's an icon or a counter for three of them here in this window. It's just a different shape. It's not the classic saucer shape. That saucer shape comes later in the evolution of the Federation. But just so you know, like in the sort of the early days of the Federation, in their cruiser design, it doesn't look like that. So that's why the OCAM looks like this. But as we, let me see, Second Fleet, I believe Fed's Second Fleet has some. Yeah, okay. So for example, here you see the OCA has this different shape, and then the YCA, I've got it up in the corner here. Let me bring it a little closer so you can see it. So the YCA has that classic saucer secondary hull and pylons behind. Not too much to worry about. Just figure it this way. Figure it this way. The YCA are the Y designated ships, YDD, YCA, YFFs. They're all the earlier generation of technology, and anything with the M beside it, hence the OCAM and the VTM and the CLM and any other ships with the M, are early era M or modern technology. The progression of technology you get in this game goes W for the very early warp refitted ships, Y era, which is early warp tech, M era, which is the modern technology, which is what the Constitution class is part of. When you think of Christopher Pike as the first captain of the Enterprise and then Captain Kirk and so on, that is all M era technology. And then after that is the General War. And it doesn't quite map to this, but effectively, if you think of the movies, and when I think of the movies, I'm thinking of the Star Trek motion picture to Star Trek 6, and you're thinking of that continuity of ships, that's kind of what the advanced ships of the General War area are. They're like slightly more advanced versions of M era ships. So that's what we're talking about. The introduction of the Excelsior class and things like that. So anyways, that's what that looks like. And those are the factions that we have. And of course, you know, we can't forget the Klingons. So this is the Klingon Empire, as we can see it here. Now we can see, this is the turn 84 map. You can see the general disposition of all the units. This is turn 84. So a general disposition of all the units. You can see that they're, our relative degree of exploration is good. You can see that we've got this little area down here. However, when we look at general exploration, we can look at Big Red, again, the Tholian faction. They're doing very well in their overall exploration and expansion. We have the Peruvian faction down here in the middle. They're doing quite well as well. Very comparable to the Federation in their level of expansion. And then the Batman faction, the Borak / the Battletech faction, Starcom. They're down here. They're not exploring quite as effectively or as efficiently as some of the other races, and that's just really just a roll of the dice situation. All of these rolls, when it comes to exploration and discovery, are based on a statistical model that we have, roll dice effectively. Because remember, this is a board game, tabletop war game that exists. This is Vassal, which is a software platform that replicates the tabletop board game, and it's just it's just providing us a digital version of the tabletop. In this case, in the sort of open map concept, and all the exploration factors or exploration rules and things are done traditionally with dice, and we do them within the context of Vassal. So that's how it goes. That's what it looks like. So that's what we're looking like right now as far as our level of exploration. As I mentioned before, we're going to do a couple things real quick. We're going to look at EP, economic points. This is how much money your faction is creating. So you can see here the Federation. Well, let's go from the top to bottom. So you'll see a number in the front and a number in the back. So numerator, denominator, and the denominator is 10. So just basically take a 0 off what you see, and that's the amount of money that they're making. The Borak are currently making 57, the Federation 61, the Klingons 57.5. Neutral's making 8. So that neutral is just like the minor factions that exist. The Peruvians 49 and the Tholians 49.5. That's where they're at. Let's look at fleet cap. Fleet cap is basically a count of the size of their fleets, counted effectively in their defensive factors. All ships provide offensive and defensive factors, and when you combine those two, that creates the sort of the stats for your ship. So as you can see here, the Borak have a total of 58 ships in circulation, equaling a total of 96 offensive factors, 231 defensive factors, with their fleet cap at 229, meaning that they are currently running more ships than they have fleet cap, and you pay a little bit of overage for that. There's like a 0.05 EP cost for every ship, every defense factor over your fleet cap, and that's basically what they're running. Federation is currently running 88 ships with a 379 fleet cap. The ISC, which is, they're scattered around here, but that's a minor faction. Not to worry about those guys. The Klingons, that's us. We have 63 ships with 180 offensive, 239 defensive factor. Now, what's interesting is about that is those numbers don't match up with the fleet cap of 249. That's because we have some crippled ships in the mix, and that when they are repaired, their defensive factors will bump up to 249. You also have the Peruvians. Don't worry about the Orions. Again, that's just a minor faction. The Peruvians have 49 ships total with 122, 214, respectively. And the Tholians have 83 ships with 107, 286. So who do we worry about? We worry about the Feds. They're down south that we border with. The Tholians, because they have that wormhole right next to us, and we share a border with them. And, of course, the Peruvians. So let's go top to bottom. Federation has 88 ships to our 63. It's quite a difference. They have 274 to our 180 attack factor, quite significant, and they've got over 100 difference in our defense factors. So effectively, the Federation is building a massive fleet, and we are quite below that. When we look at the Tholians by comparison, Big Red, they have 83 ships to our 63. However, they only have 107 attack factors, offensive factors, attack factors, and 286 in defense factors with a 286 fleet cap. So what that tells us is that we're close in the overall defensive factors of our ships. We have more attack factors, meaning we have more offensively capable ships than they do. The only thing we're really missing out on is the number of ships. And considering there's a 20 ship difference, or like basically we're a quarter less of what their total ship count. Yeah, I mean, it's significant. 20 ships is not insignificant, but the numbers aren't so out of whack that we wouldn't be able to sort of repel an attack from the Tholians, especially if the Tholians, based on the way the map is, would most likely come through the wormhole, and the wormhole has a Y-dock there. There's a lot of constraints around going through a wormhole, which we can discuss later. Basically, we're in good shape with the Tholians. And the last is the Peruvians. The Peruvians have 49 ships compared to our 63, so that's a good distribution. We have more ships than they do. They have 122 attack factors to our 180 and 214 to our 249. So overall, we're doing pretty good. We're sort of holding our own with the Tholians. We're doing better than the Peruvians, and we are, well, everyone is behind the Federation. So let's take a second and just look at the map. You can see here, like I say, we a couple key points to note. One, we're exploring this area right in proximity with the Peruvians, basically opening up the border between us and them. Also, we've made sort of direct contact with the Tholians, and we're opening up the border here in the top corner. You can also see there is a minor planet in the top corner here, which we have encountered. So, quick little recap here. They're the ISC faction, and there's a couple of ISC factions around, but those folks blew up our exploration ship. We had a minor or small exploration freighter. YFES is the designation. It moved into that hex, discovered a planet, and they blew it up. So in retaliation for their offensive and totally disproportionate use of force, we're going to stomp them. And in the midst of doing this, there's a couple key benefits that occur for us. One, we are practicing our writing of war or combat orders or battle orders, and we'll go through that in a moment, as well as the fact that we are, instead of being at peace while we are at war with them, we are at a limited war status. There are effectively 3 states of economy. One is peace, one is war, and the one in the middle is limited war. When you're at peace, you earn 50% of the total economic value of your empire. So, for example, here we have 57.5 is our total economic output. So we will get half of that at peacetime. When we're at war, we get the full value of the 57.5. And when we're at limited war, we get 75%. So while we're at limited war, we are earning 75% of that economic value. A couple of other things with regards to war. When you go to full war status, you start incurring war turns. After 20 turns, you start suffering an economic impact, which starts, as I pull up the screen here. So there we go. So when you start going past 20 turns, you hit 75% of income, which is effectively the same as limited war. Then after 30 turns, it's 50%, 40 turns, it's 40%, and 50 turns at 30%. So basically, you suffer this war fatigue as you move through. That's effectively what's going on. And so while we're still engaging this minor faction, we are at a limited war status. Why are we at limited war and not war? Well, Athos can answer that for us. Let me just turn to the chat while I mention this. So in the Athos mentions, in the W era, Federation ships were all supplied by the individual member worlds, and thus were a mix of different hulls. In the Y era, you start to see saucer design. So that's the sort of the universal thematic I'm having a brain fart here. UFP, United Federation of Planets, thank you. Design, which is that saucer section design. M actually stands for middle years. So instead of modern, it's middle years because it goes early, I suppose, very early, middle, and then general war along those lines. And then there's the 1701A was an X ship. So when he talks about the 1701A, that is the Enterprise class of ship. So what does that mean? In the original series, you had the 1701 Constitution class Enterprise. That was the Constitution class with the colorful brassards, the colorful things on the engines that kind of spun around. And when you went into the movie era, there was this refit that occurred. And in the motion picture, you had this kind of like quite significant series or sequence of shots, montage where they kind of like fly by the ship and you get to see it all in its glory. And so they have new engine designs, bigger saucer, all this different stuff. It's a total redesign of the ship model. That particular ship design is what he's talking about as the 1701A as the X ship. X ships are like these sort of super advanced ships that existed. They were more capable, could go further, go faster, and all that kind of thing. So the Enterprise class, which was the sort of modern upgrade of the Constitution class, is what that ship is. That's the movie era Enterprise that you saw from Star Trek Motion Picture to Star Trek VI, the Enterprise class of battle cruiser. In fact, Christopher Lloyd playing the Klingons in Star Trek 3 identifies it as a battle cruiser. 1701 refit was general war design. This is Athos mentioning this again. Refit was a general war design. The A was the next tech level, Star Trek 5. So I'd be interested about that because I believe that the A the A designation absolutely is after the ship was destroyed, after Admiral Kirk gets demoted to Captain Kirk after Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, and then Star Trek 5, or the end of Star Trek 4 into Star Trek 5 gets the A, which is basically a redesignation of another Enterprise class ship into the Enterprise. But I'm pretty sure, and we can go back into the lore, I believe that the Enterprise class itself would fall under the designation of an X ship, but we can dispute that at a later date. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of this. So let's just do a quick back and forth between 84 and 85. We've currently submitted turn 85. We're waiting for turn 86 to get back. Let's go right into that right now. Bang. So now we're going into turn 85. You can see here big red once again. Down here, no big changes when it comes to the Peruvians except for the discovery of this minor world. So let's just zoom in here. Let's make the scale similar. And I will show you. So you can see here, the YSR is a survey cruiser, and it is moving into this area of space. And then in the next turn, bang, it moved in here and discovered a minor planet. So this is the Lyran faction, Lyran being just one of the factions of one of the races in Star Trek. And so there's a Lyran faction that's popped up here, just like the other faction in the top corner of our map. They are a minor world, they have a fleet, they have a base, and so on and so forth. So that's what's going on right here, right there. As we go down to the... Sorry, I'm trying to get it to move sideways. There we go. The Batman faction continues to explore. You can see these sort of what I'll call the three prongs of the trident. You've got this exploration freighter going up here. Now, what's interesting about this exploration freighter, I find this very interesting. Notice this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Why is that important? Because we know, based on this, that the supply range of the Batman faction is at least 4, which most races are at this point. I'd be curious to see what happens next with turn 85. You can also see that they're building a base here 2x's away in X-ray 37, and they are within range of detecting this base being constructed by the Peruvians. So they're within pissing distance of each other, one might say. Once those two bases are finished construction, they'll be able to detect each other, which is interesting. This Y convoy has finished constructing its base, and therefore, based on its sensors, which can detect activity 2 hexes away, can detect this tug. Interesting. And then, of course, we're going to go back over to the Federation. Big thing with the Federation, we can just see they are continuing to expand or explore to the west. You can see they've discovered a resource here. They are within spitting distance of the Peruvians. They're basically touching. So very interesting to see that right there, right then. Let's take a quick look at the EP and the fleet cap for turn 85. You can see in turn 85, the Federation's gone up to 62 because they discovered that new resource we just talked about. So they're from 61 to 62. The Borak are at 57. The Klingons are still at 57.5. The Peruvians are at 51 now. And the Tholians at 50.5. So generally speaking, from an economic distribution point, we can see that the average is around 57. So we're spitting around average, with the Borak and the Klingons being effectively equal. You can see the Peruvians and the Tholians being very comparable as well at the lower end of that tier. And the Federation just light years ahead of everybody, so to speak, at 4.5 EP ahead of everyone at 62. So with the 57, 57.5, and 62, that kind of brings our average up to about 59 overall. With the top three races and their economies, and the lower averages are 51 and 50.5, effectively the same. So there's basically two clusters of groups, ones with the slightly more and the slightly less, and they're kind of in that range. Let's go to fleet cap. This is important to note, specifically because of the pace at which the Federation is expanding. So you can see that the Borak have a total of 56 ships, 96 attack, 222 defense. The Federation now have 94, so they went from 88 to 94. That's a 6-ship increase, not insignificant. And their total defense factors are now at 404, which is their fleet cap. That's a significant amount. We'll get to the reason why in a second. The Klingons, as you can see, we're continuing to build our fleet up as well. We're at 69. And we have a 199 attack, 258 defense with a fleet cap at 271. Why is that difference? Why the difference, rather? It's because of the crippled ships that we have in the mix. And the crippled ships will actually produce a defense factor closer to 271, at 271 once they're repaired. You'll see that in a moment. The Lyrans, again, that's just the Lyran faction that popped up. The Orions, again, another minor faction. The Peruvians, total of 48 ships relative to our 69. And you'll see they have 120 attack factors, 211 defense. And the Tholians at 84, which is only a 2-ship increase from before, with a 108, 289 spread. So what does this tell us from before? Basically the same thing as was in turn 84. The Federation are continuing to expand their lead of total ships and offensive firepower in the map in general. The Klingons are kind of holding their own. The Peruvians not expanding to any significant degree, and the Tholians are expanding, but, they're not an incredible offensive threat. Like, if you look at, from our perspective as the Klingons, the offensive capability of the Tholians is nearly half of the Klingons, and their defensive factors are a little bit more than ours, but that is, of course, that ties in with what I was talking about with the defensive factor of their ships versus the offensive capability of their ships. So they have 84 to our 69. That, I would argue, explains the difference. And away we go. Athos, you say 55.6 is the average. So 55.6 the average over the 5 different factions that are currently playing. But if you were to look at the top 3 versus the bottom 2, I think you'll find that the top 3. Let me see. I'm just doing this math in my head here. So let's go back to EP. So EP for the Borak 57, 57.5, and 62. So that's a difference of 5. It's a 2. Yeah, I'm ballparking it at 59. You can tell me if the math is right. Figure that out. All right, so that's where we're at. So a couple things as we talk about it. So before we get into the combat tutorial for this episode, I'm just going to talk about what's going on right here with this wonderful ISC faction in the top right corner of our map. You can see here that we have this Tholian faction. So let's make sure that we understand exactly what we're dealing with the ISC. They have the home fleet, so we'll click on ISC home fleet. So here's what they got. If you mix it all in, they have a YCA, which is a cruiser, 2 YCLs, which are light cruisers, and they have 6 of these YFFs. These are the non-crippled ships. From the crippled ships, this is from the last attack we had, they have a total of 5 Y-era frigates that are crippled, 2 W-era frigates that are crippled, and here's the kicker. They've got a Y-dock, which allows them to repair as much as 8 points of damage either to the base or to the ships. And they've got 12 Y-era planetary ground bases. Why is that important? The 12 planetary ground bases each bring 1 point of electronic warfare to the battle. And I will explain why that's significant in our combat tutorial shortly. But effectively what that means is that because of those PGBs, planetary ground bases, they are holding their own with us, which is incredible. So, long story short, you will see here that we have a total of 8 crippled ships from the most recent attack. Let's do a quick little tally of what ships we have in New Fleet, which is the fleet that's there. You will see that we have a C4B, which is the upgraded version of the C4 Dreadnought. So it's a straight 8 ship as opposed to a 6-8 ship. Basically what that means is just it has M-era weapons, but it still has Y-era engines. That's all it means. The D6M is our most sort of recent cruiser that's available to us, generic cruiser. So that is a straight 7 ship, 7 attack, 7 defense. And then you will see that we've got a whole bunch of E4Ms. We have a total of 14 of those. That is, so they have a 4 attack, 3 defense factor. Why is that important? Because the 4 attack is good as far as putting damage, contributing damage, but the 3 defense factor makes them particularly weak in longevity, meaning that they can't really stand their ground, so to speak. The F5, which would be the destroyer version of this ship, is a straight 4, so 4 attack, 4 defense. Not much different, but different enough that it makes a difference as far as in the longevity of the battle. But we'll get into that in a moment. Oh, that's good. All right, so as you can see here, there's a couple things that's going on. I just want to map out the logistics for you so you can understand how this is breaking down. So there is a fleet that will exist in Uniform 11. Basically, it will hover over this planet in the corner. The C4B, which is our command ship, it has a command rating of 10. Meaning it can control 10 other ships above and beyond itself in a fight, so a total of 11 ships in a fight. It can move a total of 4 hexes. All the other ships in that fleet being M-era ships, or middle-era ships. Thank you for the clarification, Athos. M-era ships, meaning that they have the ability to move 6, right? But the command ship can only move 4, so it's really important that we keep them within a distance of 4 of this planet. So 1, Invictor 11, 2, Whiskey 11, 3, X-Ray 10, and then 4, Yankee 10. So bang, 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 4 hexes away, they can attack. So what happens is they attack, and at the end of an attack round, you can do what's called a retrograde, meaning basically you can retreat back to another area of supply. In this case, the planet that we're coming from is a supply point. It is a strategic point of supply. An example of strategic points of supply are planets, not colonies. Important to note because you'll notice that we have a colony up in Sierra 9 here. So planets, not colonies. Anywhere there's a base, so YBS, YDK at this current state of technology. And certain tugs, not convoys, tugs can operate as a supply point. So you can retro back to the tug as a supply point. Now, what's important about this is that it allows you to retro back to the supply point, but then does the supply point have any capability to repair you? Well, the planet here doesn't at all. We are currently building a Y era base station, and you can see that here, and it will be complete in about 2 turns. So we're currently building a Y era base station, but the planet itself doesn't have any capability to repair. So they'll retro back to the planet, and then in the next turn, I have to move them to bases where they can get repaired. Then they move back, and then they can attack. So it's kind of like a 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of scenario. So as you can see here, there are a number of ships that are in the surrounding bases. So you've got 1 up here at Romeo 9, 2 at Romeo 11, and 2 at Tango 12. These are ships that are at those bases, and they can be repaired. The YBS can repair 2 points of damage, and each one of these E4Ms need 1 point of repair to be able to make it fully capable again. So they can repair 2 ships at any one YBS. Make sense? Good. So we move them to the YBSs, repair them, move them back to the planet, join the fleet, new fleet, and then they can move back up. So that's how that kind of logistics works. In addition, every turn we're building a D6M. So the D6M is the cruiser that we have available to us, and we're building a total of 5 E4Ms. As we build them, they have a free strategic move. Now, granted, they can also operationally move 6 hexes, which is, ironically, the distance to this planet. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They move to that planet. As soon as they're built, they'll join new fleet. So the turn that they're built, they move and join the fleet. The next turn, they can attack. Get what I'm saying here? So as you can see, there is a total of 8 ships that are currently crippled. They will have to move to the surrounding YBSs or bases to be repaired. And then the ships that are repaired will move to join new fleet. And new fleet, as it currently stands, will move into attack. So there's this cycle. It's basically a 3-turn cycle. They move in, they attack. They come back. They're crippled. That's 1 turn. 1 turn out to get repaired. 3rd turn, they come back to new fleet, and then they can attack again on the 4th. So I guess a 4-turn cycle. And that's how that works. Now, because of the way that the sort of the threshold has been written in the battle orders, I'm retreating after a certain small number of ships have been crippled, so that I can make sure that I'm repairing and building repairing the total number of ships that are damaged in every fight, and then I'm slowly building the total number of ships in every assault on that planet. That might seem complicated. Okay. Take a quick swig. Let's get her done. All right, everybody. This is your tutorial in combat in F&E. We're going to start with the very basics of understanding our fleet. I'm going to pull up going to pull up the new fleet and understand the statistics that you see on each counter. You can see here on the C4B and the D6M, they have an 8 and a 7 respectively. This is because there are 2 numbers that are important to any particular ship. The attack factor, meaning how much damage it can produce or how much offensive capability it can produce, and the defensive factor, meaning how much damage can it absorb. Output, input. Make sense? When you see one number there, i.e. the C4B's 8 or the D6M's 7, it effectively means that that number is the same for the attack and the defense factor, meaning that a C4B has an 8 attack and an 8 defense. A D6M has a 7 attack and a 7 defense. Look at that by contrast to the, here, we'll just pull this out so it's a little bit easier to see. So you can see here we've got 4 counters for the E4Ms. Now, 2 of those counters are grouped into groups of 6, meaning that when you group 6 of these ships together, they produce a total of 24 attack and 18 defense. Got it. But individually, those ships are a 4 attack, 3 defense ship, meaning they provide 4 attack factors and 3 defense factors. Make sense? Good. Okay. So, how does combat work? Let's go to the rules. So let's be really clear right off before we get started. The rules in this game are very detailed, but they're very easily laid out. Everything has a number associated with every rule. So for example, you will see here in the top corner, you'll see the number 300 and combat. That means that all items around combat are under the 300 category. As we scroll down, you will know they'll be like 302, 303, 304, and there'll be subcategories under those. And those will talk about the different sort of aspects of combat. Make sense? Okay, let's start with the beginning of combat. And I apologize as I'm scrolling up. Okay, 301. 301 general, 302. Okay, so combat procedure. We're going to go through this bit by bit. For those who are following on the replay, this might take a little bit of time. I need your attention if you want to know about how combat works. So focus in on this piece. We're going to take about 10 minutes on this. And when we're done, you'll know combat in and out. Good? Okay, so procedure. Each battle hex is resolved by the following procedure, which must be followed exactly for each round. To be clear, a battle hex is when one, such as your faction of ships, move into the same hex as another faction of ships. For example, if the Klingons moved into the same hex as the Federation, that would be a battle hex. If we moved in the same hex as the Tholians, as the Peruvians, as the Batman faction, whoever it is, that would be a battle hex. There's a number of ways that can be resolved, but as far as the combat goes, this is how it proceeds. Phase 1, which could, in some cases, end the battle before it begins. Player then processes until step 7, so there's a number of steps here as you can see, unless all units on one side have been destroyed in step 6. So this is, as we work through the process, you can see that certain ships will be or not be destroyed. In which case, when all the units from the opposing faction have been destroyed or yours have been destroyed, the battle hex has been resolved. Players then proceed, where both players have the option to retreat. So basically you go into a hex and you have the option to back out, right? If either faction retreats, step 8 is used to resolve the pursuit on the retreating forces. If neither retreats, then you must return to step 2, which is the next step we're going to talk about, and fight one another in a combat round. If both retreat, then neither one of you pursues the other, and we're all done. Once a given battle hex is resolved, the players proceed to another battle hex. So if you have multiple hexes where battles are occurring, so on and so forth. After all battle hexes have been resolved, the combat phase is over. So keeping in mind that this is a turn-based strategy game, so things happen in sequence, and we can certainly go through in another episode the entire sequence of how all things happen. This episode is specifically about combat. Good? Okay, here we go. Step 1. So withdrawal before combat. The defending player, meaning if you're already in the hex and the other person comes into your hex, I can already hear the question, Tony, what if I'm moving into the hex and the other guy's moving into the hex? This is where initiative comes into play. In this game, initiative is determined by the lowest number on the economy scale or the amount of EPs you generate. The lower you are on that scale, the earlier you are in initiative, i.e. the person with the lowest economy or the lowest number of EP being produced will have the first initiative in every turn. Make sense? So the person who has initiative over the other player will move into that hex. If you're both moving into the same hex at the same time, the person with initiative will be there first. The person who comes next in the sequence will come after. And therefore, the person who was there first will have the option to, they will be, in this context, the defending player. Good? So the defending player announces if he will, or she will, voluntarily withdraw their forces. If reserve forces were sent to the hex, and that's a whole other thing we'll talk about in another aspect, we won't talk about it here, then those units can withdraw before, if reserve forces were sent, no withdrawal before combat can occur. If there is no withdrawal, proceed to step 2. The attacking player then announces if they will oppose the withdrawal, meaning that they will not let you run away. The attacking player, so note that the rules for blocking pursuit, which is one we're going to talk about here, have no effect on conducting an opposed withdrawal before combat. And then there's a piece here about fast ships. We're not going to talk about fast ships yet because we're not even close to that level of technology, so we won't talk about that. So, retreat. If the attacking player did not oppose the withdrawal, the defending player may retreat some or all of his ships, and there is no pursuit. Note that the only ships that can retreat from a non are not the only ships that only ships can retreat, not non-ship units, i.e., fighters, bases, things like that. Battle. This is what we care about. If the attacking player opposed the withdrawal, the defending player may withdraw some of his ships, but not required to withdraw any. The defender has two, count them, two methods for calculating how many of his ships he may withdraw. Sorry, the defender may have two methods, withdraw, and may select either option. Either of these options. Also see evading combat with cloaks. But we're not going to talk about cloaks because no one in this game has cloaks. Option 1. You may draw up to 1/2 of the ships, meaning like however many ships you got in that hex, you can withdraw half of them right away. Round fractions down when determining how many ships you may withdraw. A single ship could never withdraw without permission. Option 2, the defender may withdraw any number of ships as long as he leaves a number of ships in the hex equal to the number of attacking ships in the hex. So if you had 5 ships in that hex and the attacking player enters with 1, you can retreat 4 of those ships and leave 1 left to be able to defend against the attacking ship. Make sense? Good. In the case of either option, and we're going to see that in a second, for crippled ships and fighters, they cannot be left behind unless the carrier, tender, base is also left behind. That's with regards to fighters. One of the 3 units with the largest command rating must remain behind and must be the flagship of the battle force in the first combat round. So you will look at the number of ships you have in that hex, and you will have to pick the one with, out of the top 3 ships with the command rating, one of those 3 ships has to stay behind. So for example, you can't have, for example, in my case, let's say I had 3 dreadnoughts and, 2 dreadnoughts and a cruiser, and then a whole bunch of those E ships. I can't leave one of the E ships to fight the battle. I have to leave one of the dreadnoughts or the cruiser because they are the ones with the top 3 command ratings, 10, 10, and 8 respectively. So example 1, the attacker has 10 ships. The defender has 4. In option 1, the defender can withdraw 2 ships, which is half of 4. Under option 2, he cannot withdraw any ships. Example 2, if the attacker has 4 ships, the defender has 10. My goodness. Under option 1, the defender can withdraw 5 ships. That's half of them, remember. So half of the 10 ships, he can withdraw half of them. Under option 2, he can withdraw 6 of them, leaving 4 because the 4 ships of the attacking factor have to be met. Make sense? I know this is a lot. And it gets very complicated. So there's a bit about cloaks here. We're not going to cover that. If some defending units retreat, they must be placed on the map on the retreat hex selected. So that's another thing about retreat hex. If the remainder of the force later retreats, it must go through the same hex, even if the situation has changed during the combat step, and a new evaluation of the retreat priorities would have required a different hex. So this talks about basically where the ships go when they retreat. We're not going to talk about that here in this context, but just know that there is a sort of a hierarchy of where you can go. And in this example, the ships that retreat have to be placed in that hex based on sort of where your priorities are. And they can't be reevaluated if something changes as a result of the combat. A force conducting an opposed withdrawal, so this is when the attacking player opposes your ability to retreat, which would ordinarily leave half of its force behind, cannot avoid this requirement by leaving a base behind. So if you had a base and a fleet and another faction attacks you, you can't just retreat everybody but the base. You have to leave ships behind with the base, if that makes sense. and has no effect on withdrawal before combat. Slow units such as auxiliaries, convoys, and FRDs cannot withdraw before combat, but could retreat under the provisions. So again, we're just talking about retreat or withdrawal before battle. This is all kind of leaving the fight before the fight even starts. This isn't talking about retreating in the fight. This is I'm going to avoid the fight before it even starts. So that's what these rules are talking about right here, right now. Quick note here from Athos. However, later tech FRDs count as a retrograde point. Oh, so he's talking about when we're talking about retrograde, meaning that you attack and then you can sort of move back to another point. FRDs have that capability. Retreat. So any withdrawal or retreat by either player is done using the procedures for retreat given in step 7. All the retreating ships go to the same hex. There is an exception in the case of allied ships. Full strength groups of fighters or PFs. Not to worry about that right now. And then, so end of battle. If all of the defending units withdraw from the battle hex, go to step 7. But remember that there will not be a pursuit battle if the withdrawal is not opposed. If some or all defending units remain in the hex, go to step 2. Withdrawal units, again, this is withdrawal before combat, so avoiding the fight before the fight even starts. If some of the defending ships withdrew before the combat, these ships are no longer in the battle hex and are ignored when calculating the required battle force size. The 3 best flagships, I was talking about before, Dreadnought, Cruiser. See this particular rule for the first battle force only. All right. So now we're in step 2. So you can see here, just already, you can see that the rules are quite robust, detailed, obnoxiously administrative when it comes to this stuff. But the good news is that they're broken down in such a way that you can, this is a PDF, you can control F and search for everything, and you can find exactly how everything works, right? So the good news here is that it really spells out everything that happens and how it's supposed to occur, meaning that we have a full understanding of how this sort of procedure happens in the course of a fight. And this will come into effect when we write our battle orders, which is sort of an artifact, if you want to call it. It's something that happens in the context of our game because we play this over email in turn. Whereas if you were playing this in real life, with you across the table from me, we would all be able to say this in real time. So no harm, no foul. So step 2, action with bases. Quick sip. Oh, that scotch is, whiskey. Whew. Step 2, actions with bases. So when required, this step is used only if there is a base in the hex. So you've seen in our map, and I will go back to it right now. You can see here, as I get this out of the way, we've got bases everywhere. Now, everybody has this as well, but basically we have bases in proximity within 2 hexes of each other. And you can see that we've got, in most cases, ships next to those bases. Make sense? So in the context of this rule, if there is a base in the hex, it is required because the hex is considerably larger than the range of the base's weapons. So the base has bigger weapons than a ship, but the range of those weapons is not bigger than the entire hex because it's a sector of space, which is, I'm sure if we were to go to Space Time, great YouTube channel, by the way, you can see they have a description of what describes a parsec, and that's essentially what a hex is, a sector of space. Parsec, they can describe to you what a parsec is. It's much bigger than the firing range of a heavy phaser. Another thing to think about is planets, with or without planetary units, planetary defense units. So FRDs, tugs, serving as supply points or deploying mobile bases, convoys, and Tholian pinwheels, something to think about because we have Tholians right next to us, big red, and transports carrying EPs are treated as bases for the purposes of this rule. While they may lack the long-range weapons of a base, the owner will defend them much the same. Thus, an FRD can be required to be in the battle force in a non-approach battle, and I'll get to that in a moment, where it is probable, where it probably will be destroyed. So, for example, if you are attacking a hex with a convoy or an FRD or some kind of high-value unit, that thing's got to be in the battle force and able to be targeted by the attacking player, if that makes sense. Thus, the FRD can be required to be in the battle force, is what I was talking about just a second ago, where it probably will be destroyed. Also, see also cloaked approach, which is a whole other thing, but we won't talk about cloaked ships. Multiple bases. It would be theoretically possible for several bases to be in the same hex. Because the hexes are so big, you can put multiple bases in there. And these might be at the same location or at different locations, creating what amounts to a multi-system hex. This is what our capital systems are. That's a whole other rule set, but we'll get into that at a much later date. Of course, many capital hexes have multiple systems, each with multiple planets and more than one base, each with a different planet. Bases in a hex are recorded at the time they are first built as being with a planet or previously built base or at a separate location. Upgrading a base does not change the location. Note that the definition of location provides that all the fixed defenses at a location are part of the battle, possibly under special rules below. All that means is that when you build the base, it's probably going to be on the planet. If you need to be it other than the planet, you're going to say that, and so on and so forth. So usually not an issue in this game, except in multi-hex. When you build multiple bases in the same hex, meaning that they are either co-located or they're not co-located, meaning that the way we run this game, basically, if you build two bases in the same hex, they're far enough apart that they can't mutually defend each other. They can't have two bases in the same hex where they can both contribute the same amount of firepower to the defense of each other. That's just how that works. So, in the case of multiple bases at a planet or colony, we won't get into that rule. We can talk about it at a later date. Convoys, FRDs, and tugs serving as supply points are designated as to their location. At the start of each round, they can only be damaged if that base is the focus of attack. That's directed damage. That's a whole other set of rules. They cannot be sheltered by the excluded base. This is a whole other issue. In the event of two or more bases in any type, we won't talk about that because we just kind of mentioned about how we run those rules in this game. And then, so when we come to substep 2A, approach battle. So when you attack a base, as the attacker, you have the option to offer what's called an approach battle. The reason why you would do this is because bases, obviously, have attack and defense factors of their own, and depending on the ships in the hex, the bases may have a higher command rating than the ships in the fleet, meaning that they can have more ships in an attack that, for example, you might have a cruiser that has a 8 command factor, right? That means it could command 8 ships as well as itself, total of 9 ships. If you had a YDK, by example, it has a command rating of 10. It can command 10 ships plus itself. So you would have a total of 11 ships, including the base, that would be contributing to the attack factors and defense factors. Mike is saying something. For your digestion, since we did discuss the Federation State design history, the YCA, the Republic class, unable to be upgraded to M. It's a 4-6. Got it. The CAM, the Constitution class, that's the ship of April Pike and Kirk. It's a 7-8. The CA, Constitution class upgraded, the GW refit of the CAM, Star Trek. So that's the movies, Star Trek 1 to 3 is what he's claiming here. And the CX, Enterprise class X ship, first ship of the class was originally named Vincennes, but renamed Enterprise, and that's the 1701A. X-Tech is as above GW. So there's a number of different games here. So we're talking about Federation and Empire, which is it's currently designed by the Amarillo Design Bureau, but it was originally designed by somebody else. FASA had their own game. I want to say it's called Federation Commander. I might be wrong there. They had a slightly different interpretation of the classes here. And Mike's in the middle of writing something down. But yeah, I think there's a change up. Oh, okay. Here we go. Ready? Ding, ding, ding. ADB was originally Task Force Games. Okay, Task Force Games. That makes sense because I seem to remember that. FASA doesn't enter in it. But FASA had a different Star Trek tabletop war game, hex-based, using the movie era ships. They had the Reliant, the Enterprise class, class ships, and I could swear it was called Federation Commander. I can't remember the name of it. I'll have to look it up at a later point. Mike, maybe you can look it up. But FASA designed that game and put it out there. And because there was Starfleet Battles and then Federation Commander, and they were both competing sort of starship simulators, but they were both they were different but very similar. They just used different kind of layouts for the ships. Right, so approach battles. Approach battles are offered when you are the attacking player and you're going to attack you're going to attack the base, and you want to offer them the opportunity to come out and meet you before the fight on their home turf. So here's how that goes. Player may challenge the attacking player may challenge the defending fleet to a fight at a distance from the base sufficient for its weapons and scout sensors, but not its fighters and PFs. Interesting. To be ineffective. This is known as an approach battle. So what that means is that EW and weapons, so any EW or attack and defense factors that the base would provide, don't contribute to the fight. But if it had ships that would be fighters or pseudo fighters, which is PFs, they would be able to participate in approach battles. Those come later, sort of in GW. The attacker is required to make this offer on the first combat round of each battle hex. The attacker must achieve success to move beyond an approach battle. Make sense? If the attacking player declines to make the challenge, he cannot decline the first round, or if the attacking player challenges and the defending player declines, proceed to substep 2B. If the attacking player makes the challenge and the defending player accepts, proceed to step 3. But the base is not used in resolving the battle. The base's fighters and PFs may be used as independent units, and there are rules for that. Fighters and PFs, pseudo-fighters, from the base or PDUs used in the approach battle count against the command limits of the battle force. The attacking player may offer an approach battle on any round, even after fighting the battle at the base itself. Interesting. I didn't realize that. It's important to go over these things. So this is when the meat and potatoes of the battle begin, and here's how it works. If not fighting an approach battle, the attacking player then has the option of fighting near the base. If the attacking player declines this option, he must retreat from the hex using the procedure in step 7 below. So here's an important little trick to know. You can offer an approach battle. So let's say you offer a battle. You see that there is way more defending that you thought was going to be there. For example, ships react or move to be able to defend that base. You say, that's a little too much for me. I'm going to back away. You offer an approach battle. They decline it because they want you to come right up to the base so they can include the base in the attack and defense. And then if they decline the approach battle, you can then book it. You can retreat from the fight at that point without any harm, any foul if you're the attacking player. This is why that's important. You come in with 10 ships. They initially only had, let's say, 2 ships in the base, but then from reactions, all of a sudden they have 10 ships and the base. You think, this is going to be a slugfest. I'm going to lose more than I'm going to gain. I'm going to back out before this even starts. Because you're the attacking player, you have the option to offer the approach battle. This is your way to get out. You offer the approach battle. They choose not to take you up on it, and you back out. Clean and easy. It is theoretically possible that there could be 2 bases in different areas of the battle hex in this case, and that's a whole other thing, but we won't go into that. Tugs setting up a mobile base, which will be a factor that's going to be coming up soon relative to everybody's sort of R&D levels. Must be in the battle force. So if you're a tug and you're setting up a base, you got to be in the battle force. Or they are judged to have abandoned the mobile base, meaning that it's you lost it. Tugs conducting base upgrades must be in the battle force, or they are judged to have abandoned the upgrade and the EPs that are paid for it are lost. Tugs used in this fashion are included in the command limits of the defending battle force, and their combat potential does not count as part of the force without any effect on the construction or the upgrade operation if the tug is destroyed. Hold on, let's reread that. Tugs used in this fashion are included in the command limits of the defending battle force. Got it. And their combat potential does count as part of the force. Makes sense. Without any effect on the construction or the upgrade operation. And if the tug is destroyed, see this rule. Okay, got it. No big deal. Attacking the base. Let's just take a quick look at the... see, I lost my my Twitch notes here. FedCom is ADB. Yeah, so Mike, what was the if you look it up, there is a FASA based Starship Simulator game, much like Starfleet Battles. It's a little bit more lightweight. It's faster, easier to use. And the reason why I remember this is because back in the day, the folks that I used to play this stuff with, they liked Federation Empire. They loved Starfleet Battles, but it was a little bit too heavy for me at the time. Look above. Ping, look above. Yeah. Not FedCom. Yes, they did. They held the license for it and the Starsheet. Yeah. No, but there was a FASA game. I'll have to look it up here. All right, hold on. We're going to move this over here. We're going to bring this back up. Boom. Okay. So while this is going on, I'm going to look this up. No. Goodness gracious. FASA star. Give me a star. Truck. Tactical Combat Simulator. That's it. What's it called? Oh, it was literally called the Star Trek Starship Tactical Combat Simulator. Let me guess. This is what Mike is about to tell me. This was the FASA game. Star Trek Tactical Combat Simulator. Yeah, okay. So that's it. Yeah. So what's the deal with this game? Because I remember playing this game. It was hex-based. It had great counters. And the ships were all like from the movies, which is what I remember. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It had the Excelsior, all these other ships. Yeah. For sure. So it was great. I remember this game, and I remember playing it. Yeah. Okay. Let's get back to the rules. Okay. The minis rocked. Absolutely. I love the minis on this. And they were compatible. Obviously, Starfleet Battles and this Starfleet Tactical Simulator game, they had cross-compatible models. It was great. Okay. Step 3, battle force determination. So here's where our command rating comes into play. Organization. This step is performed secretly, by both players. Each player removes his units from the battle hex, marking the hex with one of the battle counters. So this doesn't really occur in our game, but if you were playing the tabletop game, you take all the counters out of that hex. You just put it like a little counter that says that's a battle hex, and then you would start putting it on the battle board. I'll show you that in a moment. The counters are then placed on the battle board and organized. If there is a base or a planet, PDUs, and the hex. Yeah, okay, good. So let's just take a quick second, and I will show you the battle board. It's here in a second. There we go, battle mat. That's what I'm looking for. So this is what they're talking about when they talk about a battle mat. So it says alliance and coalition. Don't think about it in those terms. It's basically blue team, red team. Attacker, defender. So attacker's red, defender blue. And then you can see there's a room for a flagship. There is a room for up to 10 ships because the highest command rating is 10. Then you've got an admiral or a marine general, and they add command points in those regards. And then you can see on the back end here, you've got a scout, you've got a carrier, pseudo fighter, tactical force or task group, and then you've got DBs, which are drone bombardment, RT, I don't know, and H, I don't know. I have to look that up. Required units, planets and bases. So we talked about planets and bases in the sense of like you might have planets with planetary ground bases, planets with, bases with, whether it's a YBS or a YDK or whatever it is at this point. And then you have convoys, FRDs, tugs, and SAFs are special attack forces, but that's not something we have to worry about right now. And then there's the BUR, or the battle intensity rating, which is something we'll talk about in a moment. So this is what the battle mat looks like. Let's get back to the rules. So flagship. Each player secretly selects one of his units to be the flagship for the battle force. A base can be a flagship, but it is treated as a non-ship unit. This must be one of the 3 units with the highest command ratings. So there are 3 ships in your formation that have the highest command ratings. One of those 3 ships must be the command ship. So for example, you might have a YBS, which has a command rating of 8, a Dreadnought, which has a command rating of 10, and a cruiser, which has, or let's say a command cruiser, which has a command rating of 9. 8, 9, 10. One of those 3 ships has to be your flagship. Let's say it's your Dreadnought, then you have 10 other ships that you can put into in the attack force. If it's the cruiser, if it's the base, YBS, has a command rating of 8, then it would be 8 other ships. The command cruiser would be 9 other ships, and so on and so forth. So crippled units may be excused from the selection process as the owning player's option, but the 3 highest rated non-excused ships are known as the flagship candidates. So basically, if you have a crippled ship, you don't have to consider it as one of those candidates, but there are cases in which an inferior force wants to do as little fighting as possible. Since it wants to avoid casualties, the player controlling such a force would naturally want to exclude many of its good ships from the battle as possible, but still must have a valid flagship. Units with a command rating of 0 may be used as flagships if they are one of the 3 highest rated, while units with no command rating marked NA can never be. The flagship must be from the Empire, which provided at least 50% of the total ships in the battle force. So if you have a kind of a combined group, Klingons and Federations attacking Peruvians, Peruvians and Federations, or Federation and Peruvians attacking the Klingons, or Klingons and Peruvians attacking the Federation, whatever it is. If you have a teammate and you're providing more than 50% of the ships, you've got to provide the flagship. In defining 50% of the total ships, this does not include non-ship units such as bases, PDUs, or fighters, or PFs. Mercenary units count in the total number of ships, but not for any given empire. Drone bombardment ships, the formation bonus ship, and the free scout all count in the total number of ships, and for their owning empire, captured ships used under that particular rule count as a ship of the current owner. All right, so we got 3 viewers. Welcome everybody to the show. We got Athos, our standard viewer, and then we've got a third on the go. Please put your comments in the chat below. Athos has already put his comments in there. I'll put a little something in here. Hello, I will type. And then please put your comments in and let us know how we're doing on the rules here. The only units in one fleet are are fighters, PFs, and that player has no flagship. Let's try this again. If the only units in one fleet are fighters or PFs, that player has no flagship. But 3 ship equivalents can be in the battle force. So if you have no flagship, you can have 3 ships in the battle force. Note that this paragraph cannot be applied if there are any ships or bases in the hex. So we're talking about pseudo fighters or fighters in this context. Even ships which are part of groups, and that's a whole nother thing, must be considered for flagship duty if the ship is selected as the flagship. If the ship selected as a flagship is an escort in a group, it will have to be removed from the group, which could have consequences for the group. So we're not even in that point yet. Groups are basically something that will occur in the general war, and we're not even close to that yet. So not to worry about that. Command ratings. So this is important. We talked about this before, and we talked about this in the MSIT, and this basically determines the amount of ships that you can have in a particular fleet. Each player then determines the command rating for their flagship from the ship information tables selected from the units in the battle hex. A number of units, in addition to the flagship, equal to or less than the command rating. So if your command rating is 10, you can command 10 or fewer ships and yourself. So there is the Dreadnought, which has a command rating of 10. It can control 10 other ships plus itself, meaning a total of 11. If the command cruiser, which can control 9 ships plus itself, has a total fleet of 10. The cruiser, command rating of 8 plus itself, total ships 9. Make sense? Okay. Multi-ship counters are counted as the number of ships they include, not as a single unit. So this is kind of basic sense. You saw on our map, for example, in I'll just close the battle map here. You see in Klingon New Fleet, there is counters that include multiples of the E4M. What they're talking about here is if you have counters that have multiples of a particular unit, such as 3 or 6 or whatever, you can't use those. It's one ship at a time is the context here. So fighters in the battle force, in the same battle force as their carrier, do not count against the command limit. Fighters operating independently from their carrier count against the battle force as ship equivalent. So basically, if you have and we don't have any in this game right now, but if you had a carrier and it had fighters with it, you're good. If you had fighters coming into the battle force without the carrier, i.e. the base, then they get added to the command rating, or they get counted as part of the command rating. There's a couple of examples here. I'm not going to go through them. Bases, convoys, PDUs, FRDs required to be included in the battle force do not count against the command rating. So this is important. You could have a base that is involved in the fight, has to be involved in the fight because it's in the hex. It has a command rating of 8. And you have a command cruiser that has a command rating of 9. The base has to be in there, but it doesn't get counted against the command rating. So you have the base plus the cruiser, command cruiser, and then 9 other ships. Command cruiser, 9 other ships is 10, plus the base is 11. Something to think about. These are things to think about when you're calculating what's going to be in the battle line. Okay? Ships that have to be there, such as, again, bases, convoys, PDUs, FRDs, they have to be in the battle force. They do not count against your command rating. Each player can have one and only one battle force in each hex. Basically, one fleet of ships in the fight. And then there are ways to augment the battle force, and those are other issues. Combat rounds. If one or more combat rounds is fought in a given battle hex, the original battle force is dissolved and all units in the battle hex are used as a pool to select the next. So basically every round starts anew and you kind of do this calculation again and again every time. Make sense? Let me just take a quick break here. I'm going to take a quick look at how we're doing on our YouTube side. Nobody on the YouTube side. But on our Twitch side, we are very active, relatively speaking. I can see that we've got Athos, of course, rocking away. We did briefly have a third viewer, and they are gone. And then, of course, we got our stock viewer. Here we go. So, Athos, thank you again for joining us on the stream. Let's get back into it. Okay. We could talk about independent fighters and PS, but those are not an issue for us right now. Minimum force. The battle force must include at least half of the player's ships in the hex, rounding up. Unless the command rating of the flagship cannot control that many units, in which case the player must use the maximum number of units it can control in the battle force. Unchosen flagship candidates may be excused from this calculation at the owning player's option. So if I'm attacking or defending, I don't have to include those ships. It's my choice. Independent fighter PF ship equivalents cannot account for more than half, round down, of the battle force unless there are not enough ships present to make up their required portion. And there's a couple of examples here, but we'll have an example in a moment of the battle that we're fighting with the ISC. Battle intensity. So in the advanced battle intensity rules, they're used to determine the burr before proceeding to step 4. So we're going to use burr in a second here, and I'll show you what that is. So step 4, this is damage determination. So you got your, basically you've determined what ships are going to be included in the fight. You can determine who's going to be on which side. Attacker, defender. Okay? So you got the attacker and the defender. And then you've got your based on that, you've got your total attack and defense factors for each fleet respectively. Make sense? So now we determine the damage that they do. Step 1. Each player calculates the total attack factors of all the units in their battle force, and this is the combat potential. So you can also include drone bombardment, but I will include that when we include drone bombardment. Step 2. Each player then rolls 1 die and determines the battle coefficient. I'll explain that in a second. So there's a thing about cloak ships and capture ships, and we won't worry about that. And then there's scouts for possible die roll shifts and information on the cumulative die roll shifts. Okay. So what they're talking about here with the combat coefficient is basically the burr. Let's roll down and just do the burr right now. Okay. So this is the advanced combat coefficient table, or battle intensity rating. As you can see here, there is a number on the left. It goes from 0 to 10. When you start, you can determine what your battle rating is going to be, how intense you're going to fight that fight. You can go from basically 0 to 4. And if you choose 4, which is max, then you've got your maximum battle intensity. And you add that with the defender. So let's say I'm the attacker. I say 4. The defender is 4. Our total is 8. And then it can go up or down by 2, as much as 2. So let's assume, for example, here the average is 5. So you can see, hold on. I'm on the wrong side of the screen. Okay, so here on the battle table, you can see burr 0 to 10 and then burr 5. Assume, let's say we're burr 5. And I have a total attack factor of 50, let's say. And what we do here is we roll a die 6. So we roll a die 6, and let's say it comes up a 3. We roll the die 6, it comes up a 3, which means that at burr 5, at 3, 25% of my total attack factor is what we're using to determine as the damage created. So for example, if I am producing 50 points of damage and only a quarter of that is being applied, so half of that would be 25, a quarter of that is 12.5. 12.5 points of damage is being applied to the opposing force. Make sense? Now, things like EW can shift this number up and down, or I should say left or right. So for example, if I roll a 6 in Burr 5, I would get 35%. But if the EW had a 2-point shift, it would go 2 points to the left. So 5 and 4, meaning it would be 30%. Or if I rolled a 5 and it went 2 points to the left, it would go from 30 to 25%, and so on and so forth. EW has this effect where you're able to dramatically impact the Burr rating, or basically the percentage of damage that's being absorbed by your ships. So let's say if it was at the very top, the tippity top of the scale at Burr 10, and you were maxing out at 50% damage, if you were able to reduce that by 10% down to 40, that's a significant amount of damage. Again, using the 50% or the 50-point model, if I was producing 50 points of damage and I amassed a Burr 10 at a roll 6, and I'm producing basically 50% of that 100 points, or sorry, that 50 points of damage, that means you're absorbing 25 points of damage. But if my EW had a 2-point shift, then that would take you down to 25? No. Hold on. I'm going to do a quick math here. A quick calculation. 50 times 0.4, 20. So it would take you from 25 to 20. That's 5 points of damage difference. That is not insignificant. So, yeah, that's a big difference. So let's go back here to where we're determining damage. So, step 3. Each player multiplies the combat potential. That's our Burr. Which is expressed in the number of damage points. These points will be resolved in substep 5 and 6. 4. Adjust the damage points from the substep 3 to account for the plus and minus points from the previous combat rounds. Note that this step is simultaneous. Units damaged or destroyed in a round will still count towards scoring damage. So basically what this means is that if you have damage left over from previous battle rounds, these plus or minus amounts can get added on, if that makes sense. So this standard combat coefficient table is the basic that we use, that the rules use, but we use the advanced table, which is this one here that you can see. So that's the one that we use in our game. So example, a Klingon battle force, ironic since we are the Klingons, has a D7C, that's a command cruiser, with 9 attack factors and 3 D7s, each 8 attack factors, and an F5, 5 attack factors. The total attack factors are 38, giving a total combat potential of 38, right? So that's a total of 38 attack factors. That's what we do. The die roll in this example is a 3, giving a damage coefficient of 25%, kind of what we were talking about before. Multiplying 38 by 25% produces 9.5 points of damage, rounded up to 10. This combat damage result indicates the number of enemy units, expressed in terms of their defense factors, which have been damaged or destroyed. So you would then take 10 points of damage and apply it to defense factors. For example, when you're dealing with the E4M, it has 4 attack, 3 defense. It can take basically 3 of those ships would be crippled. It would take 3, 3, and 3. So 3 of those ships would be crippled. And then there would be 1 ship that would take basically kind of 1 point of defensive damage, but it wouldn't be crippled yet. So it's a carryover, right? Those are those plus minus points that we're talking about. Directed damage. This is important because directed damage is a specific way that you can cause damage to an enemy faction. specifically if they are retreating. So if you're the defending force and you know that you can hold your ground and the attacker is going to retreat, you can hit them on the way out. Directed damage represents a decision by the battle force commander to select a specific enemy unit as a priority target. This will usually be a scout, PDU, flagship, tender, base, or some other key unit, high value unit, rather than just a randomly selected cruiser. While the player is not in the role of the battle force commander, he has presumably told the officer to target particular enemy units as a matter of general policy. We do this in battle orders. A player is not required to use this procedure in every battle round or any battle round. Target selection. The attacking player may, at his option, or her option, select one unit from the defending player's battle force. He cannot select two different counters. He cannot select 3 ships or 6-ship squadron, but he can select one ship that it contains. Note that by definition, he must select a unit which has sufficient damage points to damage by the procedure below when selecting PDUs for directed damage. So basically what this means is that you can't select a ship that's not going to be effectively damaged by your directed damage attack. You have to pick one that's going to be effectively damaged by you. Like, think of it this way. The USS Enterprise, the Galaxy-class cruiser from the TNG, has great shields, right? You can't be a frigate and target it with an offensive firepower that's just going to bounce off its shields and expect to cripple it. Because you don't produce enough offensive firepower to even scratch the paint, so to speak. So you got to produce enough damage to be able to damage it when you do directed damage. That's effectively what's going on here. Computation. The attacking player then deducts from his damage points, the total attack factors we were talking about, a number equal to double the defense factor of the selected unit. So what this means is basically 2 to 1. You have to produce twice the amount of damage to affect 1 point of damage to the other player, if that makes sense, right? 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 are the common ratios here. So the selected unit is then flipped upside down, showing that it has been crippled. If the unit has already been crippled, it's considered destroyed. If the target unit was crippled by directed damage, the attacking player can repeat the procedure to destroy the crippled unit using a number of damage points equal to the number of defense factors of the crippled unit. He cannot, however, switch to a second target unit. So what this means is that you can target a ship, you cripple it, you can't select another ship to try and cripple it too. You got to finish the job on that unit. Make sense? So I target a ship, I cripple it, and then I get to keep going through and finish the job. Athos is saying, we actually use 311.1, Advanced Combat Table. Oh, yeah. So he's talking about Burr. So this table I was talking about here, there's another version of this table which is a little more advanced. And that's what he's referring to. So instead of it being 5 point, you can see 25, 25, 30, 30, 35, 35. It does it in 2.5% steps. So it would be like 20, 22.5, 25, 27.5, 30, 32.5 kind of thing. That's what he's talking about. It doesn't change the context of what we're talking about here in there we go. And there goes my audio. So it doesn't change the calculation here. It just changes the table we're using. So just, again, this explanation is so that you can understand how combat works in this game. And I appreciate we're almost 2 hours into this. So yeah. Okay. Attrition units. A player using directed damage against a unit is not required to destroy its fighters or PFs, fighters or pseudo-fighters. However, any fighters or pseudo-fighters remaining at the end of a combat round when their support ship is destroyed or crippled must be transferred to other units able to carry them. So if you're crippling a carrier, it can't carry those fighters anymore. Very important to take note of. Exception. PFs may transfer to a base or tender. Fighters and PFs become minus points if only if transfer is impossible. So there's an issue here about how the damage is calculated. Again, in the broad strokes of our combat, don't worry about that. So Annihilation. If all units belonging to one or both players are destroyed, the battle hex has been resolved, and you can proceed to step 6. And there's some special cases. We're not going to go into those. Step 6. We're almost there. The defending player must give up, by crippling or destroying them, enough of his units to resolve the remaining damage points scored by the attacking player. So attacker goes first, defender goes second. This is based on the defense factors of the units he selects. Turning an uncrippled unit over, i.e. to its crippled side, resolves a number of damage points equal to the defense factors shown on the under damaged side. So for example, if you have the E4M, which is a 4-3, 4 attack, 3 defense. You flip it, it becomes a straight 2. So it's absorbed 3 points of damage, and you flip it to the crippled point, which it's 2. It would then absorb another 2 points of damage, and then it would be destroyed. Make sense? Order of resolution. The owning player selects which of his units will be crippled or destroyed to satisfy the damage points scored by his opponent. He may select these units in any order, but selects them one at a time. When the remaining number of unresolved damage points is less than half of the smallest defense factor of the remaining units in the battle force, these damage points may be ignored. If the remaining unresolved damage points are equal to half or more of the smallest defense factor of the remaining ships, the owning player must damage a unit, cripple a unit, or destroy the cripple unit, even if, in doing so, he gives up more defense factor than the other player had remaining unresolved damage points. So, for example, you have 2 cruisers from the Y era. They're a 4-6. Almost every race has the exact same. Tholians are different, but 4 attack, 6 defense. I do 15 damage to you. You get 2 cruisers. You flip 1, that's 6. You flip 2, that's 12. So you flip 2 ships, and they go from being 4 6s to 2 3s. But there's still 3 points of unresolved damage there. The 2-3 means that you have to kill one of your cruisers. Let's say it was a little different. Let's say it was 13.5 points. 4 6 4 6. So 6 is 6, 6 is 12. You flip those 2 over, and you have a 2-3 each as the crippled cruisers. There's still 1.5 points of damage left to resolve. 1.5 points is half or more. So if the remaining unresolved damage points are equal to half or more of the smallest defense factor, then that ship's destroyed. So if I did a total of 13.5 points of damage and you had just 2 cruisers, you would flip both of them and you'd lose 1 in that battle round. Does that make sense? It's important to note this stuff because this is like where the little points can matter a lot. Note that each fighter factor is a -1 point unit, meaning a 1 point unit cannot, Note that as each fighter factor is a 1 point unit, points cannot be left over as long as the target units have fighters remaining. So if you have fighters, which we don't have yet, not an issue. Owning player can damage any single unit in his battle force. He is not restricted to those ships which are remaining, I apologize, it's getting late. The owning player can damage any single unit in his battle force. He is not restricted to those ships which the remaining points would exactly cripple. A player could cripple a dreadnought, even a B-10, to resolve a single point of damage if he felt there was some advantage to doing so. So you can, as the defending player, you can pick and choose. The free scout, which is an issue here we'll talk about in a second, could be given up as a voluntary damage or directed damage. And since it is part of the battle force, drone ships conducting bombardment or PFTs sending their attrition units to the battle force could never be given up as voluntary damage, but could be attacked by directed damage. So what they're saying here is that if we go back to the battle mat, you can see here on the back, so the top of the alliance or the bottom of the coalition line, there's a scout, and then there's drone bombardment, for example. The scout can be offered up at, this is the free scout slot. It can be offered up as cripple damage. The others cannot. That's basically what they're saying, if that makes sense. No multi-ship unit, no multi-ship ground capable, no multi-ship group capable of breaking down can be voluntarily damaged or destroyed if this produces minus points. So basically they're talking about fighters and PFs, and then of course other big groups there. No uncrippled unit can be destroyed if merely crippling it would produce any minus points. Required kills. Fleet battles in space are deadly, and while damaged ships try to withdraw before they are destroyed, it is not always possible. As a result, a certain number of destroyed ships are required. The battle force scoring the damage has at least 100 So this rule takes effect if the battle force scoring the damage has at least 100 compot, meaning it has 100 points of offensive firepower, attack factors in its total attack factors at the time it is created, including the full attack factor of bases. Ships, so for example, there are star bases that have 50 points of attack factor. If you have enough ships as well that produce over 100 attack factors, this rule will start to take effect. Ships excluded from, for some reason, such example as SFGs blocked by webcasters, still count. Okay, so the adjusted battle intensity is at least 5. It is the second or later combat round in the battle hex. The combat die roll by the force scoring the damage is a 6 before any adjustment, or 6 or more after the adjustment. The force scoring the damage does not use directed damage. If all these conditions are met, so A to E, the resolution of the damage suffered must include the destruction of one ship from the battle force. So one ship must be destroyed. This cannot be a fighter, a PF, mercenary, or auxiliary non-unit based ship. So PDUs, PGBs, FDUs, SIDS. Oh, wow. Exceptions. A decline approach battle counts as a round of combat. A player is not required to kill a ship that is protected inside a web. So Thulian web, for example. If every ship in the battle force is excluded, this rule does not apply. Each planet of a multi-planet hex is a separate battle, but any approach battle counts as the first round of any of them. Interesting. If the die roll does not generate enough damage points to kill the smallest applicable unit, the rule does not apply. So this is interesting because this rule doesn't apply right now because we can't generate enough attack factors. But when we can start generating enough attack factors to get over 100, especially in the defense context, then you can pop a ship around, basically. And so, for example, if you had a starbase, full starbase, which is a 50-50 ship or a 50-50 counter, and then you had, let's say, 10. Let's just call it 10. 10 cruisers of a 7. It'll be more than 7, but let's say 10 at 7. So that's 70 plus 50 is 120. So you have 120 attack factors, period. That means that you would pop or destroy at least one ship on the defending or the attacking force every round, without a doubt. Interesting. If all units in the battle hex belong to one player, but but not all. One player in a multiplayer hex are destroyed. Oh, sorry, I'm letting my chat go deaf here, sir. We actually, okay, yeah, so same thing. All units in the battle force belonging to one player are destroyed, but that player still has other units in the battle hex. Any plus minus points carry to the subsequent battle in the same battle hex. Okay, yeah, fair enough. So what we've gone up to now is everything involved in the battle. So we talked about basically the determination of the battle force, how you determine command rating, what's included in the determination of the damage that you do to the other faction, and how you determine attack factors and defense factors and how you resolve that. Now, when you retreat, here's step 7. As the combat phase cannot end with units of both players in the same hex, one player or the other must retreat. This is known as a retreat or retreat movement. The retreat is not a form of movement. Note that the battle hex cannot be resolved unless all units belonging to one player are destroyed or captured, or they retreat. So, who must retreat? After resolving all the damage points, the defending player has the option to retreat out of the hex. So the defending player gets the first choice. Am I going to retreat or no? If they do it, this is done in accordance with the rules. Whether or not the defending player exercises this option, the attacker then also has the option to retreat. And if he does, then this is done in accordance with the rules below. So basically the defender has the option, then the attacker has the option, and if they both do it, this is what happens. So whether or not the attacking player exercises his option to retreat, the defending player is, once again, given the option to do so. So defender, attacker, defender. So I don't want to retreat. He says he's going to retreat, and I say, oh, great, I'm going to retreat too. So that's how that works, right? So the defender basically has two choices or two decision points when they can decide to retreat. If either player retreats, the battle hex in question is resolved, and the play moves on to another battle hex. If neither player retreats, the battle hex is not resolved, and the player must go to, so they keep going through the battle sequence. If the defender, so this is the first option, if the defender accepts the second opportunity to retreat, the attacker remains in the hex and does not have a further retreat option. If all ships belonging to one player are destroyed, okay, so basically the defender says, I'm not going to retreat. The attacker says, I'm not going to retreat. And then the defender says, on second thought, I'm going to get out of here. So then the attacker stays in place. There are various circumstances under which both players might have the option to retreat. A player who retreats cannot pursue the other player if he also retreats. So basically, the defender decides to retreat, the attacker decides to retreat, they can't pursue each other. But if the defender stays and the attacker retreats, the defender can pursue the attacker. Or if the defender retreats and the attacker doesn't, they can pursue the defender. So in the 3 steps, defender, then attacker, then defender, if in the first 2 steps one of those two decides to retreat and the other does not, then the other can pursue them. So how retreats are conducted. The player who has decided to retreat moves all of his ships in the battle hex, 1 hex in any direction within the limit of the rules, to the retreat priority below. And then there's a whole retreat priority there. Retreats are conducted immediately after the battle hex is resolved. The defender retreats first. If there are units in the hex which cannot retreat, bases or PDUs, the battle hex is not resolved and will require additional combat rounds. But the non-retreating player cannot pursue the retreating ship. So if you have a base or PDUs still in that hex, you can retreat and they cover your retreat, basically. Devastated planets without PDUs, even those with residual defense factors, do not block pursuit. And there's a whole issue about that below. Retreating carriers must take their fighters with them. There's a whole thing about fighters, but we're not going to worry about that. There's a thing here about retreating priority. We won't go into that right now because it's too complicated based on what we're discussing. And so there's the retreat. And then here's step 8, which is pursuit. If using pursuit rules, which we do, go to 307, any pursuit must be resolved before the battle hex is deemed resolved. So let's just go to 307. We're just scrolling down here. Pursuit is the combat operation of chasing or a retreating enemy force primarily with the intent of destroying crippled ships. So here's how it works. Pursuit takes place, as we were just discussing, after folks decide to retreat. So pursuing battle force. The non-retreating player, so it's the guy who's going after or pursuing the other player. The non-retreating player designates some of his uncrippled, so it can only be uncrippled ships, no more than 6. A flagship able to control the force must be included as a battle force to pursue the retreating enemy. These can include any ships in the hex, not just those in the last battle force. He then rolls, or she rolls, a single die. If the result is less than the number of ships in the pursuing battle force, the final round is fought. So if you include 6 ships and you roll 6 or less, you're going to fight this fight. If the entire pursuit force consists of fast ships, and that's not an issue for us, so we won't worry about that. The retreating battle force must form his battle force as follows. First, include all crippled ships. Then add up to 3 uncrippled ships. From this force, designate a flagship. If the battle force exceeds the command rating, the force is used as is, although excess ships selected from the order do not count in the combat potential and can be damaged. If the battle force does not exceed the command rating of the ships, okay. So basically, the fleet of ships that's being attacked in this pursuit round has to follow the command rating rules. The final combat round is fought normally and still in the battle hex. The pursuing player may designate 1 or more crippled ships and declare them to be a single target for the directed damage and use special ability of a mauler. So basically, if I'm pursuing you and you have crippled ships, I can target your crippled ships and destroy them. If I have a mauler, which is a specific type of ship that can do like targeted damage, only crippled ships can be targeted in this way. Maulers have a special option, and command points, free scouts, and drone ships cannot be used in the formation. The formation bonus can be used. After this final combat round is completed, retreat proceeds without further pursuit. Okay, so that's basically it. So, there's a lot there. Basically, what we described there is a description of how combat occurs in this game. Now, to give you an example of how I write my combat orders, I'm going to give you another example here. Pardon me, one sec. I'm just going to pull up the email in which I write the battle orders. I'm just looking for it here. Obviously, I'm having a difficult time finding it. Nope. Okay. So here's an example of some battle orders. These are super simple. So here's an example of the battle orders in the planet in Yankee 10. So here, I'm pointing the opposite direction. So here, you can see that I offer an approach battle. And I'm expecting, with all due respect, that they will say no to that. So they will say no to the approach battle. That follows up with, I'm going to continue to approach and attack regardless. Instead of dictating exactly what my burr is going to be, I'm focused on max burr. And here's what happens. The battle intensity rating generally speaking, from my perspective, either happens in one of two extremes. It's either max or minimum. Max is 4 with a +1 or +2 respectively. So max burr, if I go max burr and the defender goes max burr, that's a total of 8. And then there's a possibility of it going plus or minus 2. Could be as low as 6, could be as high as 10. But basically, I'm going max burr. In this case, because I'm the attacking factor, I'm the attacking party, and I want to do as much damage as possible in the shortest amount of time. That's my objective. And then I say here also that I'm going to retro to the planet, which we've talked about before. That's the planet in Uniform 11, where Uniform 11, which is where this fleet originated from. The battle line I've indicated here. Basically, it's focused on attack factors. So I've got the C4B, which has a straight 8, so 8 attack, 8 defense. There are 2 D6Ms, which are 7 sevens, so 7 attack, 7 defense. And then you've got, I can have a total of 10 ships in addition to the C4B. So the 2 cruisers, the D6Ms, and then I'm going to fill the rest up with the E4Ms. That's basically what's going on. So I have a total, in this combat, I had a total of 14 E4Ms. So what I'm saying is I'm going to, as ships get crippled, swap out the crippled ships with non-crippled ships, because a crippled E4M provides only 2 attack factor, 2 defense factor versus the 4 to 3, right? So there's a significant difference there. And so I make sure I swap out the non-crippled with the crippled with non-crippled. And then I'm just indicating here that the E4Ms will take all the crippling damage. So they'll take the damage, they'll soak up the damage, and I will cripple the E4Ms. Once 7 of the 14 that are available are crippled, I will then retreat from the hex. And the result from this was that 9 of my E4Ms were crippled, because in the retreat, I'm assuming, 2 of my E4Ms had to be crippled to be able to soak up the damage. Yeah, okay. So that's basically how that works. Now, there's a number of different ways that we can write battle orders. But if you, for example, want to participate in our game and you want to take control of the fleet, this is how simple it can be. You can follow the directions as we've laid them out in the rules. I can even provide you a copy of the PDF if need be, with the specific context of the rules, or you can buy the game in total from Amarillo Design Bureau, and you will know and have a copy of the rules of how to be able to conduct combat in this game, Federation and Empire, as played out in Vassal. And then you can understand here how these rules play in our homebrew game. So that's it. Basically, that's how we conduct our combat, how battle orders are integrated into the game. And so basically what ends up happening is that the game master conducts the sort of the nuts and bolts, the calculations of the combat. I ask the game master on a fairly regular basis for a little bit of nitty gritty on the details about how the combat happened, or like how it was resolved. Was there a strong influence of EW and various other things? So, for example, in the combat versus our the ISC, for example, they have 12 different PGBs. Each of those PGBs brings 1 EW to the fight. The EW works in a logarithmic exponential scale. And so what ends up happening is that once you get to 2 points or up to 2 points, you're causing 1 shift of damage. Once you get over that, you're causing 2 shifts of damage, like 2 shifts in the burr. And to get over that is significant. But with 12 of them, they're providing 12 points of EW, and that's enough to make a 2-point shift. And that is providing enough of a difference in the amount of damage that's being inflicted that basically neutralizes the difference between MTech ships and Y ships, because their Y frigates, for example, are 2 3s. 2 attack, 3 defense. My M ships provide 4 attack, 3 defense. There we go, 3. So effectively, while I am still doing more damage than they are, because they have so much more capacity to be able to soak it up with the base and everything else, I am winning that battle, but it's really slow. Really slow. And that's an example of how we can slow down our enemies. If folks are attacking us, this is how we can slow things down and prevent them from just sort of steamrolling us. Y ships, and this was something that was proven to me. There we go. Sorry. I'm just trying to get this. How we can. Nope. There we go. So this was something that was shown to me when it came to the player who is playing the Big Red or the Thulian faction. Let's go back to the map. I can show you that real quick. So the player who's playing Big Red here, we had played another iteration of this game where I was the Romulans and he was the Kzinti. Kzinti are they're cat-like people. And I had gotten M-Tech early and he was still at Y, but his Y-Tech ships, and based on what he was able to do, were more than a match for what I was putting forward in the M-Tech. I had fewer ships, higher attack and higher defense factors. He had more ships with slightly lower attack and defense factors, but he was able to soak up more damage, redistribute them to his YBSs, and repair them very quickly. I kept suffering over the course of our battles because my cruisers, my larger vessels, kept taking crippling damage and they weren't able to be repaired as quickly. For example, YBS can repair 2 points of damage. Well, that's great when you're talking about little frigates because they only have 1 or 2 points of damage that you need to repair. But if you have a cruiser, it's usually like 3 or 4 points of damage that you have to repair. That becomes problematic because a YBS can't repair that. You need a Y-Dock to do it in one turn. And if you have 4 YBSs surrounding a YDK, YBS being a Y-era base station and a YDK being a Y-era space dock, the space dock can repair 8, the YBSs can repair 2, and so what he was able to do is because he had initiative on me, after the attack, move his ships out to repair and then cycle them back in to soak up more damage. Effectively, he was doing what I'm doing to the this faction. Whoops, I'm in the wrong orientation here. He was doing to me what I'm doing to these guys right here, which is basically I'm cycling through fresh ships in a sufficient enough speed to be able to cause enough damage here and slowly wear them down. So at the moment, and this is turn 85, I've worn them down to the point where they have 5 of their YFFs and 2 of their WFFs damaged. He can only repair 8 points of damage. And a YFF... Hold on. A YFF takes 2 points of damage to repair, in this case, for him. So a YFF takes 2 points, which means he can only repair 4 of them. I've damaged 5 of them, plus 2 of his Ws, which means at the very best, in our next fight, he will have 3 of those crippled ships. He will have 3 of those ships crippled. And I'll be able to come in basically full bore. If that makes sense. So my Klingon new fleet will have a C4B, 2 of these cruisers, and then 14 of these guys ready to attack. If that makes any sense. And I can already share with you the results of that battle. Let's switch out here. And I will provide you the results of that battle. Well, I can tell you that the results of that battle were the following. I crippled 8 of his YFFs, 2 of his WFFs, and he has 11 YFFs remaining. No, that can't be right. Yeah, he has 2 WFFs crippled. He has 8 YFFs crippled. He has 11 of his YFFs remaining. Wow. And No. Sorry. Let's try this again. I'm reading it incorrectly. He started the fight with 12 of the planetary ground bases. This doesn't make sense. I must be reading this wrong. Hold on. Yeah, okay. So he had 11 YFFs, 2 WFFs crippled. And at the end of the fight, he had 2 of those WFFs crippled and 8 YFFs crippled. Meaning that he has only 3 YFFs non-crippled remaining. Out of my 14 E4Ms, 9 of them got crippled, which means I had 5 remaining. And then we retroed. So based on the amount of ships that I had built going to that hex and the amount of ships that I had repaired going to that hex, I'm going to have 15 ships ready to go, 15 E4Ms, 3 D6s, and still the C4B. So I have a feeling I'm going to be able to stomp him, maybe not completely next turn, but pretty close. It's only a couple turns away. So let me ask you this question. I'm still monitoring the chat here, both on the stream and in the... so I've got you and me, Athos. Athos, you still watching? Send me a little something on Twitch to let me know. And where's the other? Hold on. Still here. All right, awesome. All right, so let me ask you this question, Athos. I'm going to top up my beverage. I might need a little glass of water before I get into this whiskey. You're right. It doesn't look like blood wine, but it is. It's more like it's more like Romulan ale. That's how powerful that is. Okay. So right now, Athos, it's you and me on this stream. Let's have a little chit chat. It is turn 85. Let me pull up the map and let's have a chat about the map. All right, here's what's going on. Here's what I see. Based on fleet cap alone, Federation is running away with things. In addition, you were about to bump heads with the Batman faction. And to be fair, you got lots of room to explore before you really start bumping into Big Red up here. So from your perspective, based on where you're at, which is that you're literally bumping up against the feds, right up on the border, which you kind of like determined, although I don't know what your discussions are with the feds on border negotiations, if any. And you're about to bump into the Batman faction. And they will likely not necessarily acquiesce to your border agreement or your border suggestion. So do you have a priority on who you want to focus on? And this is a question straight up to Athos. The majority of the Fed numbers are VTM, he says, which evaporate when in combat. As to the Borak, you'll see next turn. Oh, okay. So for those of you watching, interesting to note, the VTMs are these tiny, basically, they're corvettes. So if you are Canadian, like me, you are familiar with the corvettes of World War II. These are tiny, cheap ships that were built, that were designed to basically perform a combination of escort duty for freighters across the North Atlantic and just basically defend them, be flak for the wolf packs or the submarines that were hunting the supply runs between Canada and the UK. So that's what we mean when we talk about corvettes. They're very lightly armed vessels that have minimal combat capabilities, and they don't last very long, as opposed to frigates, which are substantially more than that, and then destroyers and cruisers and so on. So as a corvette, that's essentially what a VTM is. It's the equivalent of a corvette. It is a 2-3 ship. 2-3 ships also, so they're M ships, meaning they can move 6, but they also have the combat defense capabilities of a Y-era frigate. So yes, while I will agree with Athos that they do not have the punch of a frigate, let's say, he's got a lot of them, and they have the maneuverability of an M-era ship. Also, the fact that the number of ships and the overall attack factor, like, here's the thing that gets me interested. Yeah, they're on my border for sure. So when I look at the feds, their total attack factor is 293. That is bigger than everybody else's defense factor. I, as the Klingons, have a total defense factor of 271. The Tholians, next to the Feds, have 289. The 293 attack factor is greater than anybody else's defense factor. So, let me ask you this, Athos. You're right. All those VTMs are on my border. Now, granted, they're not in, like, exuberant numbers. They're not, like, threatening me in the sense of, like, it doesn't appear like the feds are preparing an invasion, and even if they were, like, what are they going to take, like 4 EPs worth of resources? Okay, it's not a big ask or a big take. All right, there's a lot to be said for experience. And any Fed incursion will have to come through a very small gap. A Fluta gap, so to speak. Fluta. What do you mean by Fluta? I'm not familiar with that reference. If you're making reference to that in the sense of, like, 2 things. One, if it's in my context, in the sense of the feds are coming after me, I can quickly and easily control their ability to invade me through the wormhole. Like, Fulda. Hold on. Fulda. Fulda. Oh, it's a World War II reference. Located on the river Fulda. Trying to read the background here on this. Okay, yeah. Counter-reform, 18th Cold War. I don't care about the Cold War. Okay, I'm missing the reference. Can you just be super quick and let me know? West Germany, any Russian attack with armor would be funneled by terrain. Okay. Okay, West Germany. Okay, got it. So, yeah, absolutely. In your context, for example, if the Feds are going to attack you, they're going to be funneled through this very single sector of attack, basically. They can expand that funnel quickly through exploration, but bang crash. They can basically get through this very tight spot, which is right on the border with you. And then if they would do that to me, they would, in the end, they would end up taking like potentially 4 EP for me, but they wouldn't be able to get close to me because really that wormhole is going to be a limiting factor. And you're saying while you have a backdoor that he needs to defend, right? So that's the gravity well. The gravity well that you have in Tango 35 from Foxtrot 30. Yeah. That's very true. So here's a question. What is... It's funny. And I have initiative. Yes, you do. So it's funny because both Big Red and Batman don't watch this at all. And even the Federation doesn't watch this podcast or this Twitch stream or live stream either. So this is effectively a private conversation between me and you and whoever else would watch this, which is, you know, it is what it is. So here's the kicker. What are you going to do with the Batman faction? Because they're coming like for 2 things. One, the Batman faction we know is itching for a fight, and they got no one to focus on but you. And both you, well, 3 of you, Big Red, you, and the Batman faction, so Batman faction, Peruvians, and Big Red, are all basically, as I zoom out here, competing for this big void of space on the left side or the west side of the map. Like, you got all that space that you guys can compete for. And depending on how quickly each of you can kind of explore it, you're going to be vying for that space. So what's your strategy? Like, what are you thinking? What are your thoughts on all that? So Athos says they are, quote unquote, already taken care of. You'll just have to see. Okay. I guess we'll have to see. So for those of you who are watching, thank you, everybody, by the way. I can see that there are 4 viewers currently watching. So for those of you who are watching now but haven't voiced up in the chat, please just give me a little quick hello in the chat like that. And just let me know. Oh, sorry, but I need to keep my cards close to my chest for the moment. Oh, of course. Of course. I got no issues, Athos, as far as the, keeping your cards close to the chest and so on. I'm just kind of curious as to like what's going on here. So from a role-playing perspective, let me explain kind of what's going on from the Klingon perspective. So ironically, I was looking at YouTube recently. Here, let me switch up. Let me switch the perspective, shall we say. There we go. So I was recently watching some YouTube about the history of the Klingon Empire. So when it comes about the mythos, the history, the narrative behind any of the races in Star Trek, it is so bloody complicated. Why? Because You've got Star Trek, the original series, the animated series, TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery, and now Picard. And Strange New Worlds is coming. The timeline, if you want to look at it from a narrative perspective, is all broken. There is the narrative that is the Starfleet universe, which is what we're playing in, which is basically the original series and the animated series, and that's it. Then you've got another sort of intellectual property stream, which is the movies, meaning like the motion picture to TNG and Voyager and DS9. That's one IP. And then, and that includes Enterprise. And then the Discovery Picard stuff is a different IP. And I haven't included the J.J. Abrams universe as far as the Star Trek reboot. And let's get it out of the way right now. Like, I love and really appreciate the J.J. Abrams Star Trek reboot. As far as like the first Star Trek movie with Chris Pine as Kirk, I really liked that movie. It was visually stimulating. It was a great sort of breath of fresh air into the series. And every movie after that has been garbage. Absolute garbage. It is the complete flip side to the original motion picture series of pictures. The original motion picture was hot garbage. Hot garbage. Right? Like, unbelievably hot garbage. It was great intellectual thought process, but it was just hot garbage on the screen. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, bloody amazing. It was arguably the best Star Trek movie ever. The only reason I will give Undiscovered Country, like Star Trek VI, a one-up over Star Trek II is because of the sort of the way it was, and don't get me wrong, like the combat scenes and stuff, like there's special effects issues you may or may not have with the movie. The overall narrative, whodunit kind of structure of the story, I think is superior to Star Trek II. But Star Trek II is so good. Those two movies are amazing. 2 and 6. Now, Star Trek 3... hot garbage, you're being generous. Yeah, seriously. Man. Yeah, I didn't like Star Trek 3. Star Trek 4 was okay. Don't get me wrong, Star Trek 4 was like one of the best performing at the box office Star Trek movies in that era. And Star Trek 5, you want to talk about hot garbage. Oh my God, the steaming pile of compost that was that movie is unbelievable. Like, there was so much they could do with that, but to be fair, they put it in the hands of William Shatner, which I will bow and pray and like I will, do what I need to do at the altar of William Shatner, because at the end of the day, when it comes to Star Trek, I'm fundamentally a William Shatner fan. I love the Shatner version of Kirk. I love him in the original series. I love him in the movies. I love even his voice acting in the animated series, as much as I don't watch that. But I love the Shatner version of Kirk. Chris Pine's pretty good, but when it comes to Star Trek, it's Shatner and Kirk. Like that's the thing that makes it for me. And with that dynamic comes DeForest Kelley as McCoy, Leonard Nimoy as Spock. Like that trio dynamic makes it for me. The other characters around them, Sulu, Scotty, Chekhov, and Uhura, they're all excellent as well. But it is the sort of the trinity that makes it for me: the DeForest Kelley, Leonard Nimoy, Shatner. Now that being said, when you take it to the other series, like it is hard to find too much fault with TNG. Don't get me wrong. First season of TNG, in fact, arguably the first 2 seasons of TNG, not great. They're not hot garbage, but they're not great. Whereas, ironically, the first 2 seasons of the original series were great. The third season sucked like trash by comparison. So TNG, here we got TNG. So TNG, the first couple seasons, not so great. Tasha Yar gets killed off, and they have a sort of a change up in the dynamics. And then, yeah, Riker's beard was the sort of the moment when Riker's beard starts showing up. That was after the writer's strike, and then they had the change in uniforms. Boom, that's when like things really start to like really hit their stride. And I can get behind all the characters like Patrick Stewart as Jean-Luc Picard. I really like that character overall. I mean, you can from a writing standpoint, you can start to punch holes with the fact that he's English accent but a French character. He's like, there's nothing about him other than his name that speaks that translates French in the context of the show. Like, everything about him is British, speaking to the heritage of the Royal Navy. Like, that's what comes forward in his performance, which is fine. It's great. This Jean-Luc thing, whatever. But Patrick Stewart as Jean-Luc Picard, as the character, as the captain of the ship, he's excellent. Riker as sort of if you were to hybridize the Kirk character into 2, which is the cerebral version of the character, and the Shakespeare tea Earl Grey hot, like that's right. But then if you hybridize that character into the action oriented, which is Joseph Franks, which is Riker, versus Patrick Stewart's Jean-Luc Picard, like they play really well together. And the fact that there were little things like a hip or lower back injury, which caused Riker to always like do that funny chair thing that he did, where he was always straddling a chair, like that was hilarious. Like, you get to learn and love that, and then you think it's hilarious every time you see it. The fact that Geordie LaForge is I love that actor. I can't remember his name. LeVar Burton. LeVar Burton is great in Reading Rainbow and all sorts of other roles that he's been in. He's phenomenal in that role because he is just so likable. And you get to really like the engineer. He's not a typical engineer. Having been a naval officer and been around engineers, he's not like a typical engineer. The Data character, fantastic. Like, there's more spectrum to appreciate the different characters in Star Trek TNG than I find in the original series. Don't get me wrong. Like I say, I like Sulu, I like Scotty, I like Uhura, but you get more attached to those different characters in TNG than you do in TOS. And it's sort of the same way in DS9 and Voyager. They really broaden the cast in that way. So, but I mean, it is what it is, right? So let me dial it back to the role-playing aspect in this game. Up to this point, the Klingon Empire has been effectively operating as a combination, a hybrid of a republican democracy and a feudal state. Meaning that you have an oligarchy of political power brokers in the Republic. Like you had in the Roman Republic, you had the senatorial class, right? You have this class of nobles that basically ran the country and or the state. But those folks in the context of the Klingon Empire also have a martial or a military role to play, meaning that they have a distinct, there's a direct relationship between the military rank of an individual and their political stature in the society. Right? Makes sense? For So, for example, you're a diplomat, you're a senior diplomat, you're a full colonel kind of thing, right? The track up to this point in the game has been one where the Klingon Empire has been highly diplomatic, highly explorative in nature. Hence, Bottle 1 and Bottle 2, right? Bottle 1 and Bottle 2 have encountered the Federation, have encountered the Peruvians. They have been phenomenal in their diplomatic efforts and engaging in a diplomatic context. The fall down or the weakness in that system is what's been going on in this conflict, as Nixon would say, this police action with the ISC in the top right corner of the map. The Klingon Empire has been engaging with this minor empire in the context of a police action. We have allocated a reasonable amount of military resources and have looked to deal with it in a context where there have been no casualties. The objective of the mission, let me rephrase that. The mission objective has been one to achieve subjugation without casualties. Athos says, funny, we, in Asterix, don't have any problems with our miners. The Lyrans folded to our demands. That may be true. Oh, incidentally, let me reach out there. I can see obviously Athos is in the chat. Whoever else is in the is watching, I can see there's 3 viewers. One is sort of the default viewer, which is effectively me. There is Athos, and then there's our third viewer. Our third viewer, could you be so kind as to add something in the chat just so we can see who you are? It'd be great. N4NN3ers, I believe that's your handle. Can you just give us a quick holler and let us know where you're at and what's going on? Yeah, so Athos, you don't have any issues with your miners. So here's the thing. So in the context of role playing and the Klingon Empire, the question is the Klingons. I mentioned before, for example, I was looking on YouTube at the history of the Klingon Empire. The history of the Klingon Empire is one that it very closely aligns with the sort of the cultural history of this game. So in what I've seen, there is so in the context of this game, there was the Old Kings. The Old Kings were a technologically and culturally superior race that showed up on the Klingon homeworld, genetically engineered Klingons to be able to effectively provide subjugated service for what they needed in 2 ways. One, provided space-based crew for their various ships, so to be able to train them on the technology so they could effectively operate it and, again, crew their ships in combat. And 2, genetically engineer another group of Klingons to be effective and efficient laborers performing physical labor for resource extraction on the various planets they were on. In the traditional, I don't want to say traditional, in the multiverse, we'll call it, history of Klingons across all the different IPs, The Klingons started off as having a feudal style government where they had warlords that fought each other. In fact, the history behind Kahless is that Kahless was just the dominant warlord that emerged in a feudal society on the Klingon homeworld, and that from that evolved a cultural hegemony that allowed the Klingon species to be able to evolve and move on beyond their homeworld. They had an initial encounter with alien species that allowed them to be able to advance quickly, technologically. And it wasn't until the encounter with the humans, i.e. the Federation, and Vulcans and everybody else, that they started to really accelerate their technological advancement beyond sort of, we'll call it W or Y tech levels. And that's historically in the context of the Star Trek universe. There's that whole thing about, and I find it hilarious, the retcon about the smooth head versus the ribbed head Klingons. So for those who are watching this after the fact and don't remember, so original series, television series Klingons from the William Shatner days were just basically people with makeup, right? They put funny colored makeup on them, dyed their hair, put costumes on them, and they were Klingons. And basically every alien you would ever encounter would look like humans, except they've got something about them. So, for example, they had ear prosthetics that they could put on to make Leonard Nimoy look like a Vulcan with the pointy ears, and Romulans and so on, right? But they didn't have the budget or the sophistication to be able to put the ribbed or the bumpy forehead Klingons, right? So they were all smooth forehead Klingons. And then the movie series, starting in the motion picture, they started getting all bumpy headed, right? They had these ridged foreheads. And the way they came around that was that and I actually really liked this storyline in Enterprise, where they had the genetically engineered descendants of Union Singh, like the Khan remnants. They introduced a genetic, so it was a combination of a genetic, sort of like a flu, and it combined with there was a combination of a genetic, modified genetic introduction to a plague, and that created a fusion of genetic material in Klingons that created the smooth forehead Klingons. So they became a hybrid of Klingons and augmented human DNA, which is hilarious because that is something that, as Worf describes in DS9, they don't talk about. But what's awesome about that is that what that introduced is augmented DNA, as in like superhuman DNA, into the Klingon genome, and that Klingons were already genetically fucking top notch. And so they added that with the augment genome, and they became like super soldier Klingons. Like, I think that's amazing. So that's the difference between smooth head and bumpy head Klingons. And so in the context of this game, that's essentially what we've done, is we've talked about how the old kings, this advanced culturally and technologically society, subjugated Klingons, genetically engineered them to be able to be manual laborers, bumpy head Klingons, and the ones that could succeed in space and be intellectually sophisticated to be able to operate their warships, smoothhead Klingons. And that Kahless, a smoothhead Klingon who had the intellect, rose up against the old kings, and the entire Klingon species rallied behind him, and there was a revolution. And that they collectively took over the technology that was available and dominated, basically were able to take control and eliminate the old kings, the remnants of the old kings, which in the history of what's in this game, what ended up happening is then when they took over or assaulted the last base station, the last outpost of the old kings, they found the desiccated remains of the old kings, meaning that the old kings had already been long dead. And that leading up to the revolution of the Klingon Empire, there had been an ongoing war with an unknown adversary. And that this ongoing war had led to the degradation of the old kings, their supply lines, their technology, their ability to command and control their subjugated species, which is why there was a gap, an opening for the Klingons to revolt. And so when they did, and they eventually took over the last stronghold of the old kings, they found the desiccated remains of the old kings. They were already long dead, run out of supplies and food and all that. So, two things. In this game, there is a faction. There is a unknown faction, a GM-controlled faction that is the high-tech opposition, the Juggernauts, that is... Yeah. Okay, based on the John Ford novel, The Final Reflection. Yeah. So I haven't read that novel, but this is basically the same premise, right? So there's an unknown faction in this game that is the Juggernaut faction. And so we say Juggernaut, but that's just because of the name that's given to the faction in the Starfleet Battles nomenclature. And so this faction is going to be so technologically advanced, they're going to cause more than an issue for everybody. In fact, they initially caused an issue for Athos, Mike, when they popped up through a wormhole and, caused some major issues for him. But let's touch base with Athos's comments here. Fass's explanation was that the Ridge Klingons were the base stock. And they altered the members of their own species to better cope with the species on their borders, humans and Romulans. Yeah. I've seen that too. So there is this line of thinking that there was this crossbreeding program that existed between humans and Romulans and Klingons, where there was basically three factions: purebred Klingons, hybrid human Klingons, and hybrid Romulan Klingons, and they existed on these various borders, and there was some like benefit that would come from that. And Athos was saying, with regards to the Juggernaut faction, he lost 11 ships to that Juggernaut faction, which is not insignificant, because the Juggernaut faction is like GW Tech. So when he encountered them, he was at Y Tech and they are GW Tech, and I'm sure the number of ships was relatively small. So he took down 1 DD and 3 frigates, so 1 destroyer with 3 frigates, and he lost 11 ships. Wow, that burns. 4 to 11. Woo! That's some harsh stuff. Okay, so 4 to 11. That's a pretty good ratio. So, but he had to do that because he had to eliminate that threat, because if he didn't, those ships would continue to sort of infiltrate his space and cause issues and problems. One of the biggest challenges in this game, especially with the wormhole introduction, or the introduction of the wormhole rule from last game, is the navigation, or being able to sort of handle. We're only up to 2 viewers. Okay. Just you and me, Athos. One of the things about this game is the challenge with wormholes, and that the fact that you're able to... The challenge of projecting force through wormholes. It's an opportunity, but it's a real hindrance as well. So, here's the deal. Athos. It's just you and me on this live stream. We're almost 3 hours into it. Based on where we're at, what do you see as your top 2 greatest threats? Oh, wow. Okay. So this is epic. I love this. So the 2 top rated threats are me and the Feds. So if I'm looking at this objectively, I would totally agree with you. And the reason why I say that is because of the fleet distribution, in the sense that I've got, if you look at the fleet cap, which I'm going to look at right now, you got the Feds with 94 ships and me with 69 ships. And when you look at the factions that border you, i.e., right now, you directly have borders with myself and the Feds. So that makes sense that we would be the 2 factions. The Feds have 94 ships and we have 69, both of which are greater than yours, and that the Borak and the Tholians, being sort of like soon-to-be factions that you will have encounters with, have numbers of ships and attack factors and defense factors that are less than what we have, relatively speaking. It totally makes sense that you would determine that. And you say, and the fact that the Feds won't reply to any comms. Yeah, okay. Okay. All right, Athos. We are nearly 3 hours into this live stream. It is incredibly unlikely, even though I know that the Feds do follow this live stream. They don't ever watch it. Do you see us, the Peruvians and the Klingons, collaborating in some way to be able to check or somehow mitigate the evolving threat that the Federation is becoming? Change our color to green. There we go. I see the 3 of us as a troika, a 3-legged stool. We balance each other's ambitions. Okay. Okay, so we balance each other's ambitions. So based on the current distribution of economic and military power, which is that, of course, the Federation is significantly ahead of you. The Klingons are sort of the middle ground, and you are lagging behind, just within the perspective of the Feds, the Klingons, and you, economically, and arguably militarily, as far as the number of ships, attack factors, and defect factors, and all that stuff. How could we work together to be able to mitigate the concern of the rising Federation threat? So I say that, and then I'm now reading the response. So it's the pariah principle. One goes after, I'm assuming one another. They get jumped by the other. So if you go after one, you get jumped by the other. Okay. I hear you. Based on the current distribution and proximity of forces, is there a way in which the Peruvians and the Klingons could work together to be able to mitigate the Federation? Cheers, by the way. Since we're talking about the Federation, I'm going to go blue, just for theme. Yep. I'm not too sure on this point. I am a bit too fuzzy in the head to come up with anything concrete tonight. Fair enough. Hey, Loki. What's up, buddy? All right. So here's a good question for you. Who that third viewer is? I want to welcome whoever it is who just joined our live stream. Hey, Loki. Thank you for licking my hand. Thank you for joining us. If you could be so kind as to put something in the chat, exclamation point, a hello, a hi, a something, a whoever you are. It'd be wonderful just to be able to see who you are. Thank you so much. Very much appreciate you showing up on the live stream. And yeah, we're just talking about the sort of the political tactics of what's going on in the game right now. Just looking at the board right now, I'm just going to take a quick look. Pardon my... I can see that we have a couple viewers on YouTube. Hey, YouTube viewers, if you were watching right now, can you please pop something in the chat just to let me know that you are here? I can see that you're there. But can you let me know what you think about what's going on the map? I will share the map here and now. I'm actually... Hold on. One sec. A little bit of screen juggling. I apologize. I got to... move this over here. Whoop. There we go. All right. So let's go back to the map. All right. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and then I'll switch back. Boom. All right, here we go. All right, everybody. So just as a quick recap, here's where we're at. This is the top of the map. You can see the big red. We call the Tholians, big red. And they are doing an excellent job of exploration and expansion. As a quick look at their economic point distribution, the Tholians, which are the big red, are at 50.5 points. That's how much economic output they're putting. Moving up from the bottom, we have the Peruvians at 51. Don't worry about the neutral. Klingons at 57.5. That's us. Big black. Federation at 62. And the Borak, or as we call them, the Batman faction, at 57. So as we move our way down, you will see the Peruvian faction here. They are in the middle of the map. I will zoom out so you can get a quick and dirty look at what this map looks like. So you can see the top section of the map there. You've got the big red faction, which is looking like they're expanding just a little bit beyond sort of what we have in the Klingon faction. Although it's kind of deceiving because not only do we have our exploration sort of around our homeworld, but we also have this sort of other section down below. So I would argue that, you know, all things considered, we're pretty equal. Then you got the Peruvians in the middle, the Federation in the bottom right corner, and what I call the Batman faction, the black and yellow in the bottom left. One of the big things to note from a strategic level is how much space there is to the left or the east side of the map to be shared between Big Red, the Peruvians, and the Batman faction. That's my big sort of takeaway here. So let's look at all those wonderful things. For those of you in the YouTube chat, hey, let's just say something, shall we? That's me popping in and say something. But if you're joining us on Twitch, thank you so much. Athos is saying he's not sure what to say about the overall sort of depiction of the map. He's a little obviously tired. It is coming up on midnight on our local time here on the Pacific time coast, or the Pacific time on the coast, the West Coast. And I know Athos is sharing that same time zone with me, so it's a little bit late for him. But curious if there is anything that any of you commenters, so the one of us left, who would be willing to share as to what's going on the map. Let me go to the YouTubers. Hey, YouTubers. You got something you want to say about the map? I would love and appreciate your input on what you think we should do. Oh, look at that. That's not what I'm trying to do. There we go. I would love and appreciate your input on what we should do on the map here on how it goes. So as you know, we are currently working on our attack. I will zoom in a little bit. Currently working on our attack on the ISC faction in the top right corner. There is the Big Red faction here. We have a shared wormhole here. And as you can see, there is not a significant amount of military might in the proximity of that wormhole. Nothing that I can't handle. The Peruvians are continuing their exploration along our border without any significant military presence, which is perfect, just as we would like it, because if there was anything more, we would feel the need to redistribute some of our military assets. You can see the Batman faction is looking to, it almost seems like they're looking to pick a fight with the Peruvians, in the sense that what I see with the roleplay stuff coming from them, it's hilarious. Let me share with you some of that role-playing juicy tidbits. Let me, hold on. Let me do a quick... All right, let me find the email, and I will share with you the No, that's not what I wanted. I will share with you the Comstar response to what's going on the border. All right. We are not alone. Okay, so first of all, let's go through this progression. Boom. We are in, from the turn perspective, you can see here we're in year 108 spring. That is currently what we're in. Okay? It's currently what we're in. So if we go into the history of the Comstar emails, role-playing emails that we've received, this is what we've received. In year 103, so 5 years ago, we received the following. Blessed be the word of Borak, Precentor Center. Mindo Waterley greets the only Primus that the spacefaring Earth has known, Julian T. Polo. Presenter X-Corp Charlar Mori accompanied her. So I got to apologize for my pronunciation of these names. It's a little sort of tongue tangling. But the names are a little bit fancy funny. So there's the number of different ranks. Precentor looks like it's a rank that's that's present here. So blessed be the word of Borak. Presentor, and this person is center. Mindo Waterly greets the only Primus that the spacefaring Earth has known. So the only Primus probably being the most senior official that the Earth has known, Julian Typolo. Presentor, X-Corp Sharilar Mori accompanied her. So there is a Primus, a Precentor, and another Precentor. Primus, Precentor X-Corp Mori, has some news that you've been waiting for all these years. Precentor Waterly says as a way of introduction. She nods to the young Mori to present. So again, one Primus, two Precentors. Got it? Looking as excited as a child at Yule, she swipes several times on her tablet, holds it out to the Primus and blurts, "Here." "What am I looking at?" he says as he takes the tablet. Explorer Corp's long-range scans detected warp activity, a lot of it, or else we'd not be able to detect the traces. In 4 other locations in the galaxy, there are other star-faring species out there. This means we are not alone, Presenter Mori says quickly. So what this indicates is the point at which the map opened up. This was the point at which the map opened up and we saw all the different factions. There are 5 players in the game, 4 other factions other than the Batman faction. So when they talk about 4 other locations in the galaxy, we're talking about the 4 other factions. That's what we're talking about. Then the next thing is 106. So 2 years ago from where we are right now. Or again, every turn is 1 season, 2 seasons per year, 4 turns ago. Presenter X-Corp Mori stands before the first circuit and studies the Presenters arrayed before her. This is more trial than investigation, she thinks to herself. Space is dangerous. "What do you say to the charges of negligence with regards to the loss of the survey ship Outbound Light?" the lead Presenter asks. Inside, she bristled at the phrasing. "I was not aware that this was a trial, Presenter South. Space is dangerous. There were bound to be losses. X-Corp's own investigation shows no wrongdoing on behalf of the captain and crew of Outbound Light. In fact, quite the opposite." She presses a fob that had been hidden in the palm of her hand, and the lights dimmed as a projection began. It showed the sensor data from a ship with 2 red dots moving towards it on an intercept course. As you can see here, there is the sensor data from the last minutes of the Outbound Light. 2 red dots were warp-capable ships deemed hostile. The ship did all it could to evade these 2 hostiles, but apparently they were too fast and too heavily armed for a defensively armed survey ship to fight off. If you think you can do better, Presenter South, perhaps you should reactivate your own naval rank. So, this indicates that in the year 106, or just before, they lost a survey cruiser. That's what it tells me. Lastly, 108, which is this year, this turn 85. Entering the office of her mentor, Presenter X-Corp Mori presents her tablet to Presenter Center Waverly. "What am I looking at?" she asks. "Sector Zulu 36, her mentee replies. "A warp trace picked up by a base and reported to us later that it should. The Demi-Presenter has been removed from his post." So, there was some issue about reporting. Got it. Mindo Waterly steeples her fingers. "This might be the opportunity we've been waiting for." It suggests to Presenter North that he send the recently blooded Takesis fleet to check it out. Perhaps they are descendants of the Exodus. So I don't know about this, all this chitter chatter as far as like what he's talking about. But let's take a look at the Takesis fleet. So we look at the Borak, Borak fleets. Takisis fleet. Boom. Takisis fleet has 1 cruiser and 3 frigates. So the comment here, the suggestion is that Takisis fleet is going to move to be able to take note of what happened in Zulu 36, which is this. So Takisis fleet is a really minor fleet, like it's not a lot of ships, and he's going to move it up to deal with that. So here's what I find amusing. Don't get me wrong, the YCA is a 4.6. That is a standard value attack defense factor for a Y era cruiser. The frigates, on the other hand, 3.9 for 3 of them means it's a 1.3. His frigates are a 1.3. That's crazy. That seems like a very low number. So 1.3, and he's going to take that fleet up to encounter the Peruvians. The Peruvians are going to stomp him hard. Hard. What do you say, Athos? Are you going to stomp that fleet hard? Oh, so Athos says, I'm going to turn it in for the night. Feel free to plot my demise. I won't see it for now. Okay, fair enough. Well, it is just a little pinch past midnight, and it's probably time for us to log off for tonight. We'll re-edit the, I'll re-edit rather, the combat tutorial. So we'll make that a little bit more of a digestible YouTube video for you on our YouTube channel. If you're following us on Twitch, then feel free to, of course, hit the follow button. But head over to YouTube on Star Trek Lost Stars, and give us a subscribe over there, and you can be able to follow up on us. You can follow us on the YouTube channel as we distribute or publish our newest videos when it comes to the tutorials, which will be cut down versions of this, a little bit more digestible, a little bit more easier to understand, and so on and so forth. Also, if you have stuck with us this far, then thank you so much. Please feel free to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/lost stars. Then you can find us there, and you can join the Klingon Empire and participate in our classified Discord, where we talk about our strategy and our tactics to be able to move forward and conquer the universe. It's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to doing it in the near future. As I'm scrolling through the screens. All right. Well, it has been a wonderful evening. We're coming up on a little over 3 hours. Thank you so much for joining us today on Twitch. Thank you for joining us on YouTube. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I wish you the most wonderful evening. Join us next time on Star Trek Lost Stars on YouTube, here on Twitch. Like I say, follow, subscribe to catch the next episode, and we'll see you next time. Ciao for now.